Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My driving purpose since I became Chancellor is to make working people in all parts of our country better off, to rebuild our schools and our hospitals, to invest in our economy so that everyone has the opportunity to succeed after 14 years of mismanagement and decline by the party opposite, culminating in a £22 billion black hole in the public finances. That was their legacy, and the first job I faced as Chancellor was to set it right. So at the budget last October, and again in the spring, I made the choices necessary to fix the foundations of our economy. And we wasted no time in removing the barriers to growth. The biggest overhaul of our planning system in a generation, launching Britain's first national wealth fund and reforming our pension system to unlock billions of pounds of investment into our economy. We are starting to see the results. The stability that we have provided has helped support 4 cuts in interest rates, saving hundreds of pounds a year for families with a mortgage. Real wages have grown by more in the first 10 months of this Labour government than they did in the first 10 years of Conservative governments. And the latest figures show that we are the fastest economy growing in the G7. With countries around the world lining up to do business with Britain again, with new trade deals with India, the United States and with the European Union too. We are renewing Britain. But I know that too many people in too many parts of our country are yet to feel it. This government's task, my task as Chancellor, and the purpose of this spending review is to change that, to ensure that renewal is felt in people's everyday lives, in their jobs and on their high streets. The priorities of this spending review are the priorities of working people, to invest in Britain's security, in Britain's health, and to grow Britain's economy so that working people are better off. Mr. Speaker, today I am allocating the envelope I set out in the spring. I am enormously grateful to my excellent team of officials at the Treasury and to my right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, for his tireless work throughout this process. Crunching the numbers, looking at the assets and the liabilities. And on that note, can I thank all my Cabinet colleagues for their contribution to this process. They are all assets to this Labour government. In this spending review, total departmental budgets will grow by 2.3% a year in real terms. Compare that to the Conservative choice of austerity. In contrast to our increase of 2.3%, they cut spending by 2.9% per year in 2010. So let's be clear. Austerity was a destructive choice for the fabric of our society. And it was a destructive choice for our economy too, choking off investment and demand, creating a lost decade for growth, wages and living standards. That is their legacy. My choices are different. My choices are Labour choices. The choices in this spending review that are only possible because of my commitment to economic stability and to the decisions that this government has made. The Conservatives' fiscal rules guaranteed neither stability nor investment, and that is why I changed them. My fiscal rules are non-negotiable, and they are the foundation of stability and of investment. My first rule is for stability, that day-to-day government spending should be paid for through tax receipts. That is the sound economic choice, and it is also the fair choice, because it is not right to expect our children and future generations to pay for the services that we rely on today. This first rule allows me, as I set out in the budget last year, to allocate £190 billion more to the day-to-day running of our public services over the course of this spending review, compared to the plans of the previous government. My second fiscal rule enables me to invest in Britain's economic renewal, while getting public debt down on a downward path. The rule has allowed me to increase public investment by over £100 billion in the autumn and a further £13 billion in the spring. Investment to rebuild our transport networks, to rebuild our defence capability and to rebuild our energy security. In short, to grow our economy. Mr. Speaker, I've made my choices. Tough decisions, yes, for stability. Changing Britain's fiscal rules, yes, for investment. And today, delivering that investment for the renewal of Britain. Now it is a time for the parties opposite to make their choices. The spending plans that I am setting out today are only possible because of the decisions that I took in the autumn to raise taxes and the changes to our fiscal rules. Every one of those changes was opposed by the parties opposite. So today, they can make an honest choice, and they can oppose these spending plans, as they opposed every penny I raised to fund them. Or they can make the same choice as Liz Truss: spend more, borrow more, with no regard for the consequences. And in their clamour to cut taxes for the richest, the Conservatives crashed our economy. They sent mortgage rates spiralling and they put our pensions in peril. I will never take those risks. And reform, well, they're itching to do the same thing all over again. Now, the member for Clacton may be playing the friend of the workers now, but some of us are old enough to remember when he described the disastrous Liz Truss budget as, and I quote, the best Conservative budget since the 1980s. Mr. Speaker, after the damage is done, he still nods along. They have learnt nothing. And his party have been in Parliament for less than a year, and yet they have already racked up £80 billion of unfunded commitments. They are simply not serious. Mr. Speaker, every day it becomes clearer. It is Labour, and only Labour, that has a credible plan for the renewal of Britain. As I said in my spring statement, the world is changing before our eyes. And since the spring, the challenges that we face have become even more acute. The signs of our age of insecurity are everywhere. So we are acting on the promise in our plan to change, building renewal on foundations of national security, border security and economic security. As the Prime Minister said earlier this month, a new era in the threats that we face demands a new era for defence and security. That's why we took the decision to prioritise our defence spending by reducing overseas development aid, so that defence spending will now rise to 2.6% of GDP by April 2027, including the contribution of our intelligence agencies. That uplift provides funding for my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, with £11 billion increased in defence spending and a £600 million uplift for our security and intelligence agencies. That investment will deliver not only security, but also renewal. In Aldermaston and Lincoln, in Portsmouth and Filton, on the Clyde and in Rosyth, investment in Scotland, jobs in Scotland, defence for the United Kingdom, opposed by the Scottish National Party, delivered by this Labour government. And as we invest in our armed forces, our military technology and our supply chains, that also brings huge opportunities. £4.5 billion of investment in munitions, made in factories from Glasgow to Glasgow, Stevenage to Radway Green, and over £6 billion to upgrade our nuclear submarine production, supporting thousands of jobs across Barrow, Derby and Sheffield. We will make Britain a defence industrial superpower, with the jobs, the skills and the pride that come with it. A more unstable world presents new challenges at our borders too, where conflict has opened the way for organised criminal gangs. The British people rightly expect us to have control of who comes into our country. The party opposite said that they would take back control. Well, Mr. Speaker, they lost control. With one failed policy after another, no control, no security. In contrast, in the budget last year, I announced £150 million to establish the new Border Security Command. And today, to support the integrity of our borders, I can announce that that funding will increase with up to £280 million more per year by the end of the spending review for our new Border Security Command. Alongside that, we are tackling the asylum backlog. The party opposite left behind a broken system. Billions of pounds of taxpayers' money spent on housing asylum seekers in hotels, leaving people in limbo and shunting the cost of failure onto local communities. We won't let that stand. So I can confirm today that, led by the work of my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, we will be ending the costly use of hotels to house asylum seekers in this Parliament. Funding that I have provided today, including from the Transformation Fund, will cut the asylum backlog, hear more appeal cases and return people who have no right to be here, saving the taxpayer £1 billion a year. That is my choice, Mr. Speaker. That is the Labour choice. That is the choice of the British people. And, Mr. Speaker, if we want national security in a dangerous world, that does not stop at the strength of our armed forces or at our border. I have long spoken about what I call securonomics, the basic insight that in an age of insecurity, government must step up to provide security for working people and resilience for our national economy. Put simply, where things are made and who makes them matters. Take energy. The Tories neglected our nuclear and renewable sectors and closed our gas storage facilities, leaving us exposed to hikes in energy prices when Russia invaded Ukraine. And it was working people who paid the price for their mistakes. On this side of the House, we understand that energy security is national security. And so, because it is the right choice for bills, the right choice for jobs and the right choice for growth, this government is investing in the biggest rollout of nuclear power for half a century. A £30 billion commitment to our nuclear-powered future. Yesterday, my right honourable friend, the Energy Secretary, and I announced £14 billion for Sizewell C, producing the energy to power 6 million homes, supporting more than 10,000 jobs, including 1,500 apprentices, to build the nuclear workforce of tomorrow. And, Mr. Speaker, that's not all. We are investing over £2.5 billion in a new small modular reactor programme. Our preferred partner is Rolls-Royce, a great British company based in Derby. This investment is just one step towards our ambition for a full fleet of small modular reactors, as well as providing a route for private sector-led advanced modular reactor projects to be deployed across the UK. Alongside these, we are making nuclear-approved land available in Sellafield to attract private investment and create thousands more jobs. And I'd like to thank my honourable friend from Whitehaven and Workington for his work in this area. And to strengthen Britain's position at the forefront of a global race for new nuclear technologies, a cause championed by the Mayor of the East Midlands, Claire Ward, and my honourable friend, the member for Bassett Law, and to support pioneering work taking place in West Burton in Nottinghamshire, we are investing £2.5 billion in nuclear fusion. And to back British industries, pioneering work in carbon capture and storage will take place. Last year, we announced funding for 2 sites, on Merseyside and in Teesside, where we are building the world's first commercial-scale CCUS plant. Today, I can announce support for the Acorn project in Aberdeenshire, supporting Scotland's transition from oil and gas to low-carbon technology, a challenge and an opportunity well understood by the leader of Scottish Labour, Anas Sarwar, and by my right honourable friend, the Scottish Secretary. And we are also backing the Viking project in Humberside, a cause long supported by my honourable friend, the member for Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes. And because I am determined to make sure that the energy technologies of the future are built here and owned here, and that those jobs come to Britain, with spending review decisions means that we can invest in the wholly publicly owned Great British Energy. Great British Energy, headquartered in Scotland. These are investments to make sure the towns and cities which powered the last industrial revolution will play their part in our next industrial revolution, to reduce our reliance on overseas oil and gas and protect working families from price shocks. A new generation of energy industries for a renewed Britain. That is my choice. That is Labour's choice. That is the choice of the British people. Economic security relies on our ability to buy, make and sell more here in Britain. In April, this government faced a choice: to let British Steel in Scunthorpe go under or to intervene. We heard representations from workers. Mr. Speaker, that choice was the choice not of the metal trader, but this Labour government. We heard representations from workers, trade unions and from my honourable friend, the member for Scunthorpe. My right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, and I were not prepared to tolerate a situation in which Britain's steel capacity was fatally undermined. We were not prepared to see another working-class community lose the pride, lose the prosperity, lose the dignity that industry provides. So we did intervene to save British steel and the jobs that come with it, and I am proud of that decision. And this government will invest in Scunthorpe's long-term future and the future of steelworks across our great country, and in a vote of confidence in our homegrown steel. Heathrow Airport, where we are backing London by backing a third runway, has signed the UK Steel Charter, a multi-billion-pound airport expansion backed by Labour, built with British steel. And as we build our train and tram lines, our military hardware and our new power stations, that will mean orders for steel made in Britain. In Sheffield Forgemasters, where we are investing in nuclear-grade steel, and in Port Talbot, where this spending review confirms the £500 million grant to Tata Steel. A future for British-made steel, and a proud future for Britain's steel communities. Things built to last, built here in Britain. That is my choice. That is Labour's choice. That is the choice of the British people. This Labour government is backing British business. There will be more to come in the weeks ahead with our 10-year infrastructure strategy and our modern industrial strategy too. A plan drawn up in partnership with businesses and trade unions. And when I speak to business people and entrepreneurs about what they need to succeed, they say they need the chance to innovate. They need access to finance. They need a deep pool of talent. We have heard that message, and so today we are taking action. First, innovation, a great British strength. Our universities are world-leading, and we are proud of them. We want our high-tech industries in Britain today to continue to lead the world in the years to come, in car production, in aerospace and in life sciences. So we are backing our innovators, backing our researchers and backing our entrepreneurs, with R&D funding rising to a record high of £22 billion per year by the end of the spending review. And because homegrown AI has the potential to solve diverse and daunting challenges, as well as the opportunity for good jobs and investment here in Britain, I am announcing £2 billion to back this government's AI action plan, overseen by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Science and Technology. And second, to champion those small businesses seeking access to finance as they look to grow, I am increasing the financial firepower of the British Business Bank, a two-thirds increase in its investments, increasing its overall financial capacity to £25.6 billion, to help pioneering businesses start up and to scale up, backing Britain's entrepreneurs, backing Britain's wealth creators. And third, as we invest, if we are to thrive in the industries of the future, we must give our young people the skills that they need to contribute to our national success, as scientists, engineers and designers, as builders, welders and electricians. I know the ambition, the drive and the potential of our young people, and it cannot be right that too often those ambitions and that potential are stifled. When young people who want training find courses are oversubscribed and are turned away at the door, forcing growing businesses eager to recruit to look elsewhere, potential wasted and enterprise frustrated. So today I am providing record investment for training and upskilling, £1.2 billion a year by the end of the spending review, to support over 1 million young people into training and apprenticeships, so that their potential, their drive and their ambition is frustrated no longer. And on the subject of skills, Mr. Speaker, we should all recognise the Leader of the Opposition's own commitment to lifelong learning. At the weekend, she promised to learn and to get better on the job. Well, I am sure that members on the benches opposite will be supporting her in that endeavour. Good luck with that. As we build a strong and secure and resilient economy, working people must feel the benefits. That starts with the security of a proper home. Our planning reforms have opened up the opportunity to build. Now we must act to make the most of those opportunities. And a plan to match the scale of the housing crisis must include social housing. Neglected for too many decades, but not by this Labour government. And so, led by my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister, we are taking action. I am proud to announce the biggest cash injection into social and affordable housing in 50 years. A new affordable homes programme in which I am investing £39 billion over the next decade. Direct government funding to support house building, especially for social rent. And I am pleased to report that towns and cities, including Blackpool, Preston, Sheffield and Swindon, have already had plans to bring forward bids to build those homes in their communities. And I have gone further. Mr. Speaker, last autumn, I enabled greater use of financial transactions to support investment in our infrastructure, alongside strict guardrails that ensure that money is spent wisely through our public financial institutions. And so, in line with that commitment, I am providing an additional £10 billion for financial investments, including to be delivered through Homes England, to crowd in private investment and unlock hundreds of thousands more homes. Homes built by a Labour government, homes built for working people. But, Mr. Speaker, it is no good investing in new skills, new jobs and new homes if they are not properly connected. That is why last week, with the support of my right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, I announced £15 billion of investment to connect our cities and our towns, the biggest ever investment of its kind. Investments in buses in Rochdale, train stations in Merseyside and Middlesbrough, mass transit in West Yorkshire, and metro extensions in Birmingham, in Tyne Wear and in Stockport. And alongside that, we are backing Doncaster Airport. Today, I am announcing a 4-year settlement for Transport for London to provide certainty and stability for our largest local transport network to plan for the future. And for other regions in the UK, I am today providing for a fourfold increase in local transport grants by the end of this Parliament to make the improvements put off for far too long, to improve the journeys that people make every day. And to unlock the potential of all parts of Britain, we are going further, investing in major rail projects to connect our towns and cities. In October, I announced funding for the Transpennine route upgrade, the backbone of rail travel in the north, linking York and Leeds and Manchester, with a quarter of that route expected to be electrified by this summer. I know the commitment of my honourable friends, the members for Huddersfield, York Outer and Colne Valley to this issue. And today I can announce a further £3.5 billion of investment for that route. But my ambition and the ambition of people across the north is greater still. And so, in the coming weeks, I will set out this government's plan to take forward our ambitions for Northern Powerhouse Rail. I have also heard the representations of my honourable friends, the members for Milton Keynes North, Milton Keynes Central and Buckingham and Bletchley. And I can tell the House today to connect Oxford and Cambridge and to back Milton Keynes' leading tech sector, I am providing a further £2.5 billion for the continued delivery of East-West Rail. And on a matter I know is of great importance to my honourable friends, the members for Lichfield, Birmingham Northfield and Birmingham Erdington, I can announce today that I am providing funding for the Midlands Rail Hub, the region's biggest and most ambitious rail improvement scheme for generations, strengthening connections from Birmingham across the West Midlands and into Wales too. Mr. Speaker, for 14 years, the Conservatives failed the people of Wales. Those days are over. Following representations from my right honourable friend, the Welsh Secretary, the First Minister for Wales and Welsh Labour MPs, I am pleased to announce today £445 million for railways in Wales over 10 years, including new funding for Padeswood Sidings and Cardiff West Junction. That, Mr. Speaker, is the difference made by two Labour governments working together to undo a generation of underfunding and neglect. This government takes seriously its commitment to investment, jobs and growth in every part of the UK. And I have heard the concerns of my honourable friends, the members for Mid Cheshire and Rossendale and Darwen, and the Mayor of Liverpool City Region, Steve Rotherham, that past governments have underinvested in towns and cities outside of London and the South East. And they are right. So I am today publishing the conclusion of the review of the Treasury's Green Book, the government's manual for assessing value for money. Our new Green Book will support place-based business cases and make sure no region has Treasury guidance wielded against them. I said we would do things differently. I said we wanted growth in all parts of Britain. And, Mr. Speaker, I meant it. Backing our nations and regions means backing our devolved governments. And this spending review provides the largest settlement in real terms since devolution was introduced, with £52 billion for Scotland, £20 billion for Northern Ireland by the end of the spending review, and £23 billion for Wales. And having heard representations from many Welsh Labour colleagues, and because I know the obligation we owe to our industrial communities, I am providing a multi-year settlement of £118 million to keep coal tips safe in Wales. Mr. Speaker, I know the pride that people feel in their communities. I see it everywhere I go. But I also know that for too many people, there is a sense that something has been lost, as high streets have declined, as community spaces have closed, as jobs and opportunities have gone elsewhere. The renewal of Britain must be felt everywhere. Today, I'm pleased to announce additional funding to support up to 350 communities, especially those in the most deprived areas. Funding to improve parks, youth facilities, swimming pools and libraries. Supporting councils' fight back against graffiti and fly tipping. including in Blackpool South, in Stockport, in Stoke Central, in Swindon North, and in Newcastle upon Tyne East and Wallsend. And there's more. Job creation and community assets are vital to our growth mission. But too often, regeneration projects are held back, gathering dust in bureaucratic limbo. We are changing that. We will establish a growth mission fund to expedite local projects that are important for growth. Projects like Southport Pier, an iconic symbol of coastal heritage which has stood empty since 2022. Kilcody's seafront and High Street, where investment would create jobs and new business opportunities. And plans for Peterborough's new sports quarter to drive activity and community cohesion. Because people deserve a government which shares their ambition for their communities. To deliver renewal, to deliver growth, to deliver opportunity. And that is what you get with a Labour government. If people are to feel pride in their community, enjoyed their public spaces and spend time on their high streets, they must feel safe when they do so. Safe in the knowledge that when people break the law, they feel the full force of the law. But the party opposite left our prisons overflowing and on the brink of collapse. And they left it to us to deal with the consequences. We are taking the necessary action. So with my right honourable friend, the Justice Secretary, we have announced that we are investing £7 billion to fund 14,000 new prison places and putting up to £700 million per year into reform of the probation system too. Today, I will do more. I am increasing police spending power by an average 2.3% per year in real terms over the spending review period. To protect our people, our homes and our streets. That is more than £2 billion, supporting us to meet our plan for change commitment of putting 13,000 additional police officers, PCSOs and special constables into neighbour policing roles across England and Wales. And as well as every place, I am determined that every family feels the benefits of Britain's renewal. Falling interest rates, supported by our commitment to economic stability, are already saving many families hundreds of pounds a month on their mortgage. I have accepted pay review body recommendations for pay in our armed forces, for our nurses, our teachers and our prison officers, giving public sector workers the fair pay rises that they deserve. And in autumn, I increased the national living wage, a pay rise for around 3 million hard-working people. And this government is doing more. We're banning exploitative zero-hour contracts. We're strengthening statutory sick pay and ending the injustice of unscrupulous fire and rehire practices. Those are my choices. Those are Labour choices. Mr. Speaker, I know that for many people, the cost of living remains a constant challenge, which is why we are capping the cost of school uniforms. And I can tell the House today that I am extending the £3 bus fare cap until at least March 2027. Earlier this week, we announced that over 3/4 of pensioners will receive the winter fuel payment this year. And there is more. To get bills down, not just this winter, but in winters to come, we have expanded the Warm Homes Plan to support thousands more of the UK's poorest households, including providing £7 million to homes in Bradford, £11 million to homes in Rugby, and £30 million to homes in Blackpool. And today I can announce that I will deliver in full our manifesto commitment to upgrade millions of homes, saving families and pensioners across the country up to £600 each and every year off their bills. I am determined to do everything in my power to put more money in people's pockets, to give people security and control in their lives, to make working people better off, and to show them that this government, this Labour government, is on their side. Mr. Speaker, taxpayers work hard for their money, and they expect their government to spend their money with care. So for the first time in 18 years, this government has run a zero-based review. a line-by-line assessment of what government spends, something that the Tories didn't bother to do in 14 years. And as a result of that work, and of our wider drive for efficiencies, led by my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, in this spending review, I have found savings. From the closure and sale of government buildings and land, cutting back office costs and reducing consultancy spend, all which the previous government failed to do. Reforms that will make public services more efficient, more productive and more focused on the user. I have been relentless in driving out inefficiencies. I will be relentless in cutting out waste, with every single penny reinvested back into our public services. Mr. Speaker, I joined the Labour Party almost 30 years ago because I knew that the Conservative Party, when I grew up, didn't care much about schools like mine or the kids I grew up with. I joined because I believe that every young person should have the equal chance to succeed, no matter where they come from, no matter what their parents do. I believe that just as strongly today as I did then. That is why at the budget last autumn, I ended the tax loophole which exempted private schools from VAT and business rates. And I put that money where it belongs, into helping the 93% of children in our state schools. Mr. Speaker, they oppose money for their local state schools, and I will always prioritise them. That was my choice. That is the Labour choice. And because of the decisions that we made in this spending review, and working with my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, last week this government announced that free school meals will be extended to over 500,000 more children. That policy alone will lift 100,000 children out of poverty, children in schools from Tower Hamlets to Sunderland and from Swansea to Bridgend. Last year, at Labour Party conference, I was proud to announce the first steps in our plan to deliver breakfast clubs for every child, with an initial rollout to the first 750 schools. And we will continue with that national rollout as part of our manifesto commitment, so that no child goes hungry and every child can have the best chance to thrive and succeed. Yeah. And because I know that a good start in life does not just start at school, I can also announce £370 million for school-based nurseries to put us firmly on track to meet our plan for change commitment for a record number of children being school-ready. And for children's social care, to break the dangerous cycle of late intervention and low-quality care, I am providing £555 million of transformation funding over the spending review period, so that children do not go needlessly into care when they could stay at home. Yeah. And for children where state intervention is necessary, better care and better outcomes. Yeah. And last week, I was pleased to announce, with my right honourable friend, the Culture Secretary, that more than £130 million from the Dormant Assets Scheme with the financial services sector will be allocated to fund facilities for our young people, to give every child the chance to take part in music, sport and in drama, to fund libraries in our schools, so that the confidence and the opportunity that those resources open up are no longer the preserve of the privileged few. Those are my choices. They are Labour choices, and they are the choices of the British people. Overall, I am providing a cash uplift of over £4.5 billion a year for additional funding in the core schools budget by the end of the spending review, backing our teachers and backing our kids. Mr. Speaker, people who went to ordinary comprehensives in the 80s and 90s are all too familiar with the experience of being taught in temporary classrooms. And the previous Conservative government oversaw another generation of kids herded into cold and damp buildings as school roofs literally crumbled. It wasn't acceptable when I was at school, and it isn't acceptable now. So I am providing investment rising to nearly £2.3 billion per year to fix our crumbling classrooms. In addition, £2.4 billion per year to continue our programme to rebuild 500 schools, including Chase Community School in Enfield, Woodkirk Academy in Leeds and Budmouth Academy in Weymouth. Investing in our young people, investing in Britain's future, investing in opportunity for all. That is Labour's choice. Finally, Mr. Speaker, let me turn to the... I knew that, Chair. Let me turn to our National Health Service. It's our most treasured public service. People rightly expect an NHS that is there when they need it, an ambulance that comes when they call one, a GP appointment available when they need one, a scan that is performed when they are referred for one. I am hugely grateful to our nurses, our doctors, our paramedics and other healthcare professionals for everything that they do. If we want a strong economy where working people can fulfil their potential, then we must have a strong NHS. Not as the Reform Party have called for, an insurance-based system. We believe in a publicly funded National Health Service free at the point of use. Now, perhaps the member for Clacton should spend some more time focusing on the priorities of the British people and less time in the Westminster Arms. Although, Mr. Speaker, after this week, perhaps the Two Chairman pub might be a better fit. At the budget, I took the decisions necessary to provide an immediate injection of funding to get the NHS back on its feet. And I commend my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, for all the progress that he has already made. In less than a year, this government has recruited 1,700 new GPs, delivered 3.5 million extra appointments, and cut waiting lists by more than 200,000. Fixing our NHS also means delivering fundamental reform across social care, which means that we are backing the first ever fair pay agreement for that sector. And I am increasing the NHS technology budget by almost 50%. And we are investing £10 billion to bring our analogue health system into the digital age, including through the NHS app, so patients can manage their prescriptions, get their test results and book appointments all in one place. We are shifting care back to the community, providing more funding to support the training of thousands more GPs to deliver millions more appointments. We are investing more in prevention to meet our manifesto commitment of providing mental health support teams in all schools in England by the end of this Parliament. These investments will enable the delivery of our upcoming 10-year plan for health and put the NHS firmly back on the path to renewal. And to support that plan, to back the doctors and nurses that we rely on, and to make sure that the NHS is there whenever we need it, I am proud to announce today that this Labour government is making a record cash investment in our National Health Service, increasing real terms day-to-day spending by 3% per year for every single year of this spending review. An extra £29 billion per year for the day-to-day running of our health service. Mr. Speaker, that is what the British people voted for, and that is what we will deliver. More appointments, more doctors, more scanners, the National Health Service, created by a Labour government, protected by a Labour government, and renewed by this Labour government. Mr. Speaker, this is a spending review to deliver the priorities of the British people. Security, a strong Britain in a changing world. Economic growth, powered by investment and opportunity in every part of Britain. And our nation's health, with an NHS fit for the future. I have made my choices. In place of chaos, I choose stability. In place of decline, I choose investments. In place of pessimism, division and defeatism, I choose national renewal. These are my choices, Mr. Speaker. These are Labour choices. These are the choices of the British people, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Chancellor.
That was Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, with her spending view. Now we hear from the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride.
Mr. Speaker, this spending review is not worth the paper that it is written on, because the Chancellor has completely lost control. This is the spend now, tax later review, because the Right Honourable Lady knows she will need to come back here in the autumn with yet more taxes, and a cruel summer of speculation awaits. How can we possibly take this Chancellor seriously after the chaos of the last 12 months? We were assured, Mr. Speaker, we were assured at the election that Labour's plans involved barely any additional spending or borrowing. Now the Chancellor parades her largesse. Hundreds of billions in additional spending over this Parliament. The initial profile for that spending was, of course, significantly front-loaded, but the Chancellor now expects us to believe that she will let spending rise by only 1.2% a year. There is no chance whatsoever of that happening. For the lesson of the last year has been that when the going gets tough, the Right Honourable Lady blinks. She presented herself as the Iron Chancellor, but what we have seen is the tin-foil Chancellor, flimsy and ready to fold in the face of the slightest pressure. She said she would not fiddle her fiscal rules, then she did. She said she wouldn't make any unfunded commitments, but with the humiliation of the winter fuel U-turn, she just has. She looked business leaders in the eye and said no more taxes. But we all know what happened next, and we all know what is coming in the autumn. Her own backbenchers, her cabinet colleagues, Labour's trade union paymasters, even the Prime Minister himself, they have all seen that she is weak, weak, weak. And they can smell the blood. They will be back for more, Mr. Speaker, and they will get it. These spending plans are a fantasy. And it's not the truth, Mr. Speaker, that the Chancellor has to maintain this fiction because she has left herself no room for manoeuvre. She is constantly teetering on the edge of blowing her fiscal rules, which she already changed to allow even more borrowing. And the only way she can claim to be meeting her rules is by pretending that she can control spending over the coming years. But, Mr. Speaker, let's look at the record so far. Borrowing in the last financial year came out $11 billion above even the OBR's March forecast, and 70% higher than the plans that she inherited from this side of the House.
Tax up, borrowing up.
But for someone so keen on borrowing, Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor seems strangely reticent to even use the word. Indeed, ministers bizarrely tell us that it is Labour's fiscal rules themselves that have, quote, generated investment. The reality is a little more straightforward. They have loosened the fiscal rules so they can borrow more. Borrow and borrow and borrow, allowing the national debt to continue to rise higher every single year while ministers pretend that it is not. An eye-watering £200 billion of additional borrowing in this Parliament compared to the plans set out in the last Conservative budget, with £80 billion more to be spent on debt interest alone. In fact, if she had retained our fiscal rules, as she said, they may laugh, Mr. Speaker. If she had retained our fiscal rules, as she said she would before the election, the OBR have confirmed that she would be breaking them right now. Mr. Speaker, our country is now vulnerable. Vulnerable to even the smallest changes in the bond markets. Should we face a sudden external shock, we have no fiscal firepower left with which to respond, all thanks to the Right Honourable Lady's choices. So can I ask the Chancellor, will she be open about what she has done? Will she admit that she has made a conscious choice to borrow more and to accept higher debts? Does she accept this means interest rates and mortgages will be higher than they would otherwise have been, as the OBR themselves have said? And given she continues to claim that she has brought stability to the public finances, can I ask her what on earth her definition of stability is? And, Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor must be delighted that she does not have to face a new OBR forecast today. Because if she did, she would have to set out how she will fund her humiliating U-turn on winter fuel payments, having already blown the savings on buying off her trade union paymasters last year. She said this week there was, and I quote, she said, still work to do to ensure that the sums add up. Hardly reassuring from the person in charge of the nation's finances, Mr. Speaker. You don't need to have worked at the Bank of England for a decade to know that that pitiful utterance is unlikely to soothe the markets. So can the Chancellor confirm categorically that there will be no additional borrowing to pay for this chaotic reversal? And if this is the case, can she explain how on earth it can be paid for without raising taxes? And can the Right Honourable Lady explain why last summer, apparently to avoid a run on the pound, Mr. Speaker, this measure was so urgent that pensioners had to be left in the cold over the last winter? What exactly has changed? Because it certainly hasn't been made possible by an improvement in the economy or the public finances, which the IFS said this week are both in a worse state now than when Labour came into office. And if we had an OBR forecast, we might also get some answers on how the government intends to find £3.5 billion to abolish the two-child benefit cap, which we are led to believe is imminent. Another addition to the ballooning welfare bill, another expensive surrender to the Labour left. And we would certainly get the OBR's assessment of the economic outlook following the tariffs. Changes the Right Honourable Lady knew full well were coming. Meanwhile, her deluge of taxes and regulations has left business confidence at record lows, costing people their livelihoods. Only yesterday, Mr. Speaker, we saw the latest evidence of that. Figures for last month show the number of people on payrolls fell by more than 100,000, after already falling by 55,000 in April. Unemployment is up by more than 10% since Labour came to office. The Right Honourable Lady may trumpet extra spending today, but is not the simple truth that she has trashed the economy and left no contingency in the face of a highly volatile global outlook? It's not the reality, Mr. Speaker, that the Chancellor knows she will have to come back in the autumn with more tax rises to fund these plans? Or can she assure us right now that this is not the case? Yes or no? We know that the Deputy Prime Minister has helpfully provided her with an entire brochure of tax rises that she will no doubt be perusing over the summer. The Corbynist catalogue, Mr. Speaker. And can the Chancellor confirm, as promised, can she confirm as promised that the income tax thresholds will not be frozen at the budget, a move she herself said would hurt working people? And, Mr. Speaker, what about the uncertainties in the departmental spending plan she has just set out today? Can she assure us that these plans will not be topped up, that no backroom deals have been cut with disgruntled cabinet ministers? Can she assure us that the capital allocations announced today will actually be spent on capital, not diverted in year, as she has in the past, to day-to-day budgets to play more games with her fiscal rules? The Chancellor has had to impose a settlement on the Home Secretary because this spending review won't deliver for our hard-working police officers across the country. Instead, the Home Office budget gets squandered on asylum costs because this government simply doesn't have a plan on illegal migration. And as the Defence Secretary admitted, and I quote, "The government has lost control of our borders." Small boat crossings, Mr. Speaker, are up 42% on the same point last year. On energy, at a time when businesses up and down the country are struggling with high energy costs, the Chancellor has chosen today to fund the Energy Secretary's vanity projects like GB Energy.
Where is he?
And while we welcome the announcements on expanding nuclear capacity, the scale of ambition is a downgrade on the commitments made previously on this side of the House. Mr. Speaker, the party opposite barely mentioned farming in their manifesto. And now we know why. It's not enough to have hit the farmers in our country with a family farm tax. Today, what we see in black and white is a choice to make further cuts to the vital grants on which many farmers rely. A huge betrayal of our farming communities, and something which many of her MPs in rural areas will have to go back to their constituencies later this week to explain. And on defence, we will always welcome any additional investment in our armed forces and capability.
But there isn't any. There isn't.
Though I note, Madam Deputy Speaker, nothing was said about when 3% will be achieved.
No squeak.
All we heard was that in the intelligence service spending was to be included in defence spending to flatter the numbers. We left the party opposite a fully funded plan, which they didn't over for a year. But now, what we get is the Chancellor's own black hole on defence spending, the lack of a timeline on when we will achieve the 3%. Instead, we get a £30 billion bill for the Chagos surrender, money which should go to our brave armed forces, rather than is being reported funding lower taxation in Mauritius. The first tax cuts for which this Chancellor has ever been responsible are in Mauritius. Mr. Speaker, we would have made different choices. We would not have killed growth with huge tax rises and new regulations. We would not have talked down our economy and the great businesses up and down our country. We would be focusing on efficiency and productivity in the public sector and not handing out pay rises with no strings attached. And we would be getting a grip on welfare. Labour cancelled our plans for fundamental reform to health and disability benefits that would have seen 450,000 fewer people on long-term sickness benefits. That is a disgrace. And instead of proper reforms to PIP, their own plans are a rushed cost-cutting exercise, so rushed they even had to change them after they had announced them. And their own backbenchers are in full revolt. Yet again, they talk tough, but there is no substance. The Right Honourable Lady has no grip. She has no clue. The markets and the public see a Chancellor completely out of her depth. Having blown her headroom and more from her budget in the autumn, she was forced into an emergency budget in March to scrabble around to try and repair the damage. Today she comes before us again with yet another fantastical tale that she knows will have completely fallen apart come the autumn. So we are not left with stronger foundations, as the Right Honourable Lady would have us believe, but rather another dose of that hallmark for which her actions have made her so renowned: uncertainty and failure. And so there she sits, Mr. Speaker, powerless to resist her disillusioned MPs and her panicking Prime Minister, like a cork on the tide, the drumbeat for U-turns pounding in her ears. Yet her tone today suggests that all is well. The sunlit uplands await. What a hopeless conceit, a masterclass in delusion. Inflation is up, unemployment is up, growth is marked down, business and households are hurting, investors are fleeing in their droves. The bond market vigilantes circle. And here we have the Chancellor, who refuses to listen. Not only tinfoil, but tin-eared too. And let me be clear, Mr. Speaker, it is working people and businesses who will pay the price come the autumn, with yet more taxes to pay for her weakness and her failures. Mr. Speaker, we cannot afford this spending review. And for many, the growing conclusion is that we cannot afford this Chancellor.
Chancellor the Exchequer. I will address the
So that was Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor, responding to the spending review announcement from Rachel Reeves. The Chancellor, she will now continue to take lots of questions from people, but we are going to go through the figures. She was, of course, talking about spending, two elements of this: day-to-day spending for Whitehall departments, but also what she calls investment spending, capital spending on projects, where she will be spending more than £100 billion. And she's talking about how is she's going to divvy all of that up. So let's take a look at some of the main measures. She has announced NHS day-to-day spending will be up 3% a year. She's promised 13,000 more police staff. 2.6% of GDP will go on defence by 2027. £4.5 billion more there will be a year for the core schools budget. £39 billion for affordable and social housing, something that they pre-announced. And then for Scotland, there will be £52 billion. For Northern Ireland, there will be £20 billion. And for Wales, there will be £23 billion. There will be a new border security command, the money for that at least, £280 million. £1.2 billion a year for training and apprenticeships. She's announced £22 billion a year for research and development and £3.5 billion for the Transpennine route upgrade, £2.5 billion for delivery of the East-West Rail and £2 billion for the government's AI action plan. So let's introduce my guests once again. We have our political editor, Chris Mason. We have our economics editor, Faisal Islam. And we have Paul Johnson from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. So to take a look at what we make of all that, I can see the books being flicked through here because there's an awful lot of detail, isn't there, to go through. Chris, just first of all, what are the main things that strike you about it?
Well, the first thing to just mention after that sort of blizzard of vast numbers with lots of noughts on that are quite incomprehensible because they appear so huge and then they're across a number of years, is trying to digest in practical terms what it means. And then crucially, particularly on a day like this, perhaps even more so than on a budget day, although this happens on a budget day as well, you get the rhetoric in the chamber, what we've been listening to over the last hour, and then crucially you get this book, Spending Review 2025, packed with the tables and the graphs and the charts and all the rest of it. And crucially, as we've been trying to get our heads around in the last few minutes, the numbers that didn't get read out by the Chancellor, because the big picture thought, and we were aware of this before we heard from Rachel Reeves, but we now know it for certain with the numbers and the words, is that big emphasis from the Chancellor on that longer-term spending. Investment is the word that she kept using over and over again. That idea of improving the public realm, of trying to, in time, improve the economic potential of the country. But in so doing, some very interesting numbers we're just getting to now in the tables about where some budgets are being cut in day-to-day spending within Whitehall.
And Faisal, I mean, I think for people watching, there's been, as you say, a blizzard of announcements there about projects, things that are going to be built, things that are going to get done. And yet for individual Whitehall departments, the picture's not quite so rosy, is it? How much can we get into that at this point when you've only just
I think we can
really
start to. And the big picture, just to re-emphasise, is the Chancellor has chosen to sort of emphasise capital long-term spending and health spending, essentially, and then you have squeezes elsewhere. We can tell you which departments are the most squeezed, and what we're going to measure this by, so there's different measures, but like this is probably a fair measure, which is the next 3 years. So it's the new announcements for day-to-day spending. It's it's the same measure that we used in the chart in the introduction. So what I can tell you is the Home Office, so this is why we had a big fight between Yvette Cooper and Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary, potentially, 1.7% a year down over the next 3 years, every year. Foreign Office, 6.9%. That will be the aid spending cut, I think, mainly. Interestingly, transport, remember this is current spending, not capital spending, loses 5% a year. DEFRA, 2.7%, business and trade, 2%. Local government, where there's been big pressures, of course, on councils and in spending on care, for example, that does increase by 1.1%. But here's an interesting detail. On the spending power measure, that could increase by 2.6%. That says to me, room for manoeuvre to increase council tax.
Yes, so
you
talked about police spending power, didn't she? Which was...
I don't know if the word is precept or something. You know, you have this for social care.
It means your council tax could go up.
That seems to be the implication. I haven't read the detail here. And then on science and tech, so let's just say that one of the winners, up a significant amount, 7.4%. Underneath all of these spreadsheet numbers are interesting stories about the government's priorities and what they're going to do to make them come to life. So you take transport, for example, 5% down in revenue terms. Well, that comes from somewhere. So if you're a train company, you're going to run, what does that mean for fares? It's a question. I haven't seen that may well be answered. So there's all sorts of consequences to the numbers, and we're just finding out the sort of balancing act, the choices made by the Chancellor.
And Henry Zefferman, our chief political correspondent, has joined us. Hi, Henry. Paul, just to come to you quickly, what strikes you out of all of this?
Well, to a large degree, it's what we expected. Quite a lot for health, and that means very little for anything else. Now, you wouldn't have been able to tell that from the Chancellor's speech. A couple of things that Faisal referred to, I think, are right. Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs looks to me like the big loser out of this. I think the day-to-day spending on transport going down is because they think they need to subsidise the train companies less as numbers of people travelling rises a bit. The Home Office, I think, will struggle a bit with this because unless they really can get everyone out of those asylum hotels.
Just to go back on, because that was a big announcement right at the beginning, wasn't it? That is their aim.
That is their aim.
All spending, pretty much all spending on asylum hotels?
That was what I heard. I mean, it was hard to hear anything in that blizzard of announcements and numbers. Two other things. One is the Ministry of Defence spending is going up to 2.6% of national income by 2027, but then it stabilises. So in terms of getting to that target of 3% of national income in the next Parliament, no progress towards that. In the second half of this Parliament. I think there'll be pressure on that. And this point about local government funding as well, it pretty much says in here, not quite in so many words, it pretty much says we expect annual increases in council tax of 5% a year over the coming years in order to fund that spending power within local government. Actually, the last thing I'll say is the schools budget looks pretty tight to me. Yes, there are a falling number of pupils, but the growth in the schools budget is very, very small at a time when we know that the pressures on particularly big increases in spending on special educational needs and so on, and they have to fund within that, as I understand it, the increase in spending on free school meals. I think those are the ones that are going to struggle. I think it's the council tax, it's the Ministry of Defence, and potentially it's schools where the biggest pressure might arise over the next year or two.
And just to sort of look back for a bit as well, how does that settlement for those departments, how does that compare to what we've seen before? In terms of, they're going to be squeezed, some of them. To what extent? I mean, how will they feel this, if you like, compared to previous cuts that we've known about?
Well, they have done well over the last couple of years in general. Rachel Reeves' Labour government came in and increased spending last year and this. And don't forget, actually, that Conservative government after 2019 also increased spending pretty significantly. But that does mean that this overall average spending increase, and on day-to-day spending, it confirms what we thought, which is 1.2% a year. In historic terms, that is very low. Outside of the austerity period in the sort of early 2010s, when those were significant negative numbers, relative to what we've seen since 2019 and relative to what we saw for decades before 2010, over the period from this year onwards, this looks pretty tight.
And Henry, I mean, obviously choosing the NHS particularly, and also social and affordable housing, seen as a priority for this government. Is this about trying to really impact people's lives so that they notice a difference?
I think it is, but I think you're right to say choosing, because Rachel Reeves used that word a lot, an awful lot in that speech, choice. She said these are Labour choices. And one of the political criticisms, including from within the Labour Party, that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer have faced in their first year in office, is that it's never really been quite clear, especially when they're doing unpopular things, whether their argument is that they're doing them because they have to, because of the economic circumstances, or because they want to, because they think they're the right thing to do. And I think we saw a bit of a change from Rachel Reeves today, basically saying, I choose to do some of these things. I choose, as you say, social housing over perhaps some other things. But it is worth noting, I mean, some of those priorities that she did choose, they're still heavily based on capital expenditure. So when it comes to people seeing a change in the near term, I think there still is, a bit of sensitivity for a government there who knows that so many voters are desperate to see their day-to-day circumstances improve as soon as possible.
And Faisal, the attack from Mel Stride from the Conservatives focused a lot on increased borrowing, because he is saying, yes, you are announcing all of these projects, these are lots of things that people might welcome, but he's saying that means tens of billions, hundreds of billions more in borrowing.
Yeah, I mean, we knew about what the borrowing kind of profile would be, and this is the consequence of that. They've sort of divvied it up. There isn't new information on that borrowing. I suppose you could make a judgment that does this, as we were saying before she announced all this, does this add up to a plan that can help generate the growth that will then help, if not solve, certainly manage some of these difficult trade-offs. That is the elixir here. That's what we've been missing. So this is why she, as someone who has a long history in economics, has decided to focus on infrastructure spending. So you've seen a squeeze on the day-to-day, and you've seen a focus on infrastructure. And the hope would be that with this, and we're also going to get a 10-year infrastructure strategy later this month. She teased us on this Liverpool to Manchester Northern Powerhouse Rail. Just as a little side note, I definitely recall that being announced in the 2015 spending review by George Osborne, Northern Powerhouse Rail. So, and it's not even, as I said, on crayons on a map. It just shows you when you're trying to generate the sorts of projects that in other countries. And I think it's important to take a step back and think, how are these processes managed in other countries? How do they get to build these things much more quickly? How do they get them done? How can a Chancellor, George Osborne, who's now, what is he doing these days? He's a journalist. He's
doing lots of things.
No, I didn't. He's definitely not a politician anymore. 10 years on, the same thing gets announced, and it's practically at the same stage. That goes to show why some people have raised their eyebrows, where we've had a low rate of growth. Can this deal with that? That is my question. I've got to read the whole document, obviously, to answer that fully.
We'll let you do that at some point, not now. I mean, are people right to be a little bit sceptical about whether these projects will get off the floor and get going?
Well, as Faisal said, I mean, we have a history of doing things horrifically slowly and also horribly expensively. I mean, there is a separate line in here for HS2 still, which because it's so big within the transport budget, despite being, I think by everybody's standards, a disaster. And not providing anything like it was intended to. I think the really important thing for the government, and again, they have done the right thing here. They have focused on capital spending, and they have said they're going to really make a difference to planning rules and so on. But they really, really, really need to focus on radical changes to the way that we plan these things, deliver these things, and to reduce the costs of doing that. It's great to see the promises here. It's politically difficult as well, because the benefit of this stuff will come almost certainly well after most of the cabinet are retired, and certainly well after the next election. Perhaps there are some younger members.
This is a good moment to introduce Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, who is quite young and who knows, could be around for a very long time.
Subject to the good people at Bristol North West.
Yes. Thank you for joining us, and we have lots of questions for you, as I'm sure you would know. Rachel Reeves said last week, not every department will get what it wants. So can you tell us which department hasn't got what it wants? Overall spending is, yes, going up, but because of the priority on the NHS, there are some that are going to be squeezed, aren't there?
Everybody wanted more. They always do. I mean, I think that's just the nature of a
You've had to deal with
spending
them,
review.
asking.
I've negotiated this with all of them, yeah. But look, you'll have seen from the spending review that this is a significant increase in public spending on both day-to-day and capital spending. All of the departments, if you look at, you've probably been looking at these charts with the annual average rate of growth percentages. It's a good news story for everyone. But of course, the overall budget is not split equally between everything. That's why we're putting a huge amount of cash into the NHS to get it back on its feet, because we know that's a priority for the British people. That's why we're putting lots of money into defence and energy security and jobs, because we know that's important for people to be better off and for the country to be secure. So you'll see all of the numbers in the charts, but this is obviously not austerity. This is growing budgets for departments across government, and now it really gives us the foundation on which to be able to get on and deliver the renewal of Britain that we're setting out in the spending review today.
I mean, overall, it is a growing budget on day-to-day spending, but there is no doubt, we can already see that there are some departments that are going to face cuts.
Tell me which ones you're worried about, and I'll tell you.
Home Office. Over the next 3 years. So obviously we know that there was an upfront payment, and you obviously want to count that. I get that. But the new announcement made today for the next 3 years, the Home Office, obviously it says on your table, you're not hiding that, down 1.7% a year over the next 3 years, day to day.
Yeah, it's because of the asylum costs. So policing has got around a 2% increase in budgets for frontline policing, and the Border Security Command has a specific budget. But the asylum cost, paying for hotels for asylum seekers, waiting for a decision to be made, everyone knows we inherited this huge backlog from the last government, that has cost the taxpayer billions and billions of pounds. We're getting that down.
So what if you don't get that down?
Well, we are going to get it down.
But it's proven very difficult to do, hasn't it? So if you don't manage to succeed, you're depending on that, are you?
That's the agreement we've made with the Home Office. That's the government priority. The Chancellor said today we're going to get out of hotels for asylum seekers by the end of the hotel, and that's why the number's a little bit negative, because it's reducing a cost that everybody wants to stop spending money on.
5% down is quite a lot. 5% down almost business and trade. 2.7% a year on DEFRA. 5% a year on transport. That's quite pretty chunky stuff.
Well, let's take transport as another example. In the COVID pandemic, people stopped travelling. After the COVID pandemic, not the same number of people didn't get back on the train, so the taxpayer was subsidising the railway companies to keep going. Passenger numbers are coming back up, and so the taxpayer subsidy is going down, and that's why you've got a negative number.
So no rail fare impact? There's no hidden rail fare impact?
No, this is reflecting the fact that rail subsidy is declining because the railways have to be able to run themselves as profitable organisations, which is what they're now going to be doing.
Mel Stride, when he responded to Rachel Reeves, talked about the extra borrowing that there's going to be for capital, for projects. Yeah. Are you content with the extra borrowing, given, of course, that costs a lot of money, doesn't it, to borrow money?
Yeah, look, government debt is expensive, particularly in the UK, which is why just borrowing more money for lots of other spending requests is not the right answer. But look, within our fiscal rules, the second fiscal rule being that we can borrow for investment so long as it's falling as a share of the economy. That's what we have met. That's what the OBR confirmed we'd met at the spring statement. But look, we are making a choice there. We're choosing investment over decline. We're choosing to put more capital investment into railways and buses and council houses and the public services, including in the NHS, and into our energy security and into the capabilities of our armed forces. But that's the choice we're making because we think it's the right choice to choose investment over decline. But we are doing it within the boundaries of the fiscal rules that we set out at the budget and still on track to meet them.
And you're still confident that you won't have to put up taxes in the autumn, come the budget?
The spending review here allocates the budget that has already been set at autumn budget last year and the spring budget. This is not about spending beyond the means of that allocation. We're just allocating it out.
Council tax could go up.
Council tax has been going up, and there's an assumption on that basis.
But further than even the pattern, because of is a special thing for police that you're going to offer councils, and council taxpayers will pay the price for that.
So councils decide what they want to do up to 5% in terms of putting up their council tax. The police get a precept, a chunk of that, which is why we look at spending power for police forces. We've made assumptions in the spending numbers based on what councils across the country have broadly decided to do. But the rules are the same as they've always been, which is that councils get to decide up to 5% if they want to do that or not.
When it comes to the winter fuel allowance, which I know wasn't part of today, but obviously that reversal was announced this week. Lots of people have welcomed that. How will you fund that?
So the Chancellor's been clear that that's not being funded out of this spending review settlement. It will be funded out of announcements made at the budget in the autumn. Now, you might then say to me, well, why didn't you wait until the autumn to confirm how the new scheme is going to work? But the government's position, which is the right position, is that we wanted to give people advance notice. And so advance notice was given on the threshold and the increased eligibility for winter fuel payments this winter. But that's a decision that...
But it is that's an unfunded commitment, something that you have, of course, criticised the other parties for.
It's advance notice of a decision that's going to be taken at the budget and then funded at the budget. But a good reason for giving advance notice because it gives people that reassurance before they come into the winter period.
And before we came to that statement, during Prime Minister's questions, which was broadly being overlooked, but one of your MPs got up and asked about the two-child benefit cap and saying, given that you have reversed your decision on the winter fuel allowance, will you be looking at that as part of the child poverty strategy?
So the Child Poverty Task Force is looking at this and every other measure that we have in government to try to eradicate child poverty, something, of course, that a Labour government would like to do and has often been committed to doing. The main announcements in the spending review today are around free lunches for all children on universal credit, support for school-based nurseries, meeting the 30-hour commitment on funded childcare placements, and so on and so forth. But the outcomes of the Child Poverty Task Force, which is not reported yet, will be announced alongside the budget in the autumn.
You've also been going through all the infrastructure. That's your job, isn't it, to go through the schemes. So I think a little bit of a hint or a strong suggestion that Liverpool to Manchester project will proceed in some form at the infrastructure strategy. I'm very interested, Paul spotted this, the reference to HS2, 25 billion provided under this settlement to progress the delivery of HS2. Are you committing to the full Curzon Street, Euston Station, the tunnel? And could the costs go up to 100 billion once you update those costs to 2025 prices?
So I'll answer broadly and then specifically. Broadly, you're getting a little bit ahead of me. I'll come back and talk to you about the infrastructure strategy next week. Okay. There are some announcements that are gridded for next week.
Okay.
This week. But we'll come back to you on that. On HS2 specifically, look, this whole project has been a complete disaster. This is not a criticism of the great workforce that are working really hard to deliver it, but it's a project that had no proper budgeting, no proper delivery schedules, poor commercial leadership, went ahead before the designs were finished and was basically a political folly that we're all now paying for. It is outrageous. That can never happen again. But of course, we're committed to finishing what we've already started in the way that we've already announced as a government. So the numbers in the spending review today give that budget to HS2, a slight declining budget towards the end of the period because they're in peak delivery at the moment, will start to come down. But look, there's a whole host of lessons to be learned about HS2, which we'll talk more about in the infrastructure strategy next week.
Andy.
How certain are you actually going to stick to these spending settlements? Because as you said, this is delivering the spending envelope described in the autumn budget last year. But it's widely expected that the forecasts that will come out this coming autumn might see a deterioration in the assessment for growth and so on. I mean, you're going to be pretty tempted to reopen these at some point and try and raid departments for more savings, aren't you?
I'm really not tempted to do that because I've just finished doing it with everyone, let me tell you.
Okay, we'll come next week.
These spending reviews, the budget we set today is the foundation for public spending for the course of this Parliament. Of course, you're right, we still have a fiscal event every year, a budget with a forecast, and it's for the Chancellor and the government to reflect on that at the time, which we will do in the autumn. But I have no intention of reopening everything that's in the public budget that's being announced today.
Paul, you wanted to ask a question.
Can I ask a question about the overseas aid cut?
Yeah.
Now, the Chancellor repeated today that that cut was being used to fund defence. That's not really true, is it? Because the defence spending increase is entirely capital spending, and most of that overseas aid cut is in day-to-day spending. So the reality is that that cut is being used, perfectly reasonable political decision, to fund other departments. But that's not how it's been presented.
I don't think it's as quite clear-cut as that. I mean, look, there is Ardell day-to-day spending in the aid budget, but there's also capital spending and also the use of financial transactions in multilateral aid institutions. And the armed forces do spend day-to-day budgets on soldiers' salaries.
But the increase is entirely capital.
Well, no, there is some increase in Ardell for defence too.
But
the
it's
bulk
actually
of it,
lower than the average.
Sure, but the bulk of it is capital, you're right, because we're buying ships
Like
and
90+%
planes,
of the
and,
increase,
which is normal for defence spending, right, because they're buying kit, which often actually is technology-enabled kit these days. But I wouldn't say that it wasn't true that the aid budget wasn't going into the defence budget, because essentially it is. Is there an Ardell surplus in aid? Maybe we would need to double-check that, but there's no smoke and mirrors around here. The decision was taken to reduce aid, which is why we got a big negative number against the Foreign and Development Office. A difficult decision because we like what we did on aid in the last Labour government and support it, but that has shifted across to defence spending.
Is there anything you've totally cut in the zero-based review?
Totally cut?
Yeah. Is there anything that the government does that it's not doing? And there's a wider critique here, which is, are you managing the public's expectations? There's all sorts of budget line items now in local authorities, in the education budget, that would have been emergencies 5-6 years ago and now taking up all the budgets. Something changed fundamentally in our expectations about public spending.
Well, look, we've done the zero-based review, which is the first time in 18 years we've looked line by line. There's been a significant process of looking at savings and efficiencies, including through reform. The Office for Value for Money has done some work with us on that, and their documents are being published today alongside the spending review. Through the Savings and Efficiencies programme, we've been able to free up tens of billions of pounds, which has gone back into frontline public services, as well as putting investment up front to modernise areas of failing public service that will take us some time to fix over the course of this Parliament. We bear down on costs, for example, in terms of the government's use of management consultants. We're selling some London properties we don't really need anymore. We're reducing the size of the civil service. So there's those types of things that are in the saving and efficiencies envelope. But have we turned something off 100% that wasn't on before? I can't think of an example.
Any famous properties?
It's quite hard to do that. Are you interested? I've got a couple to flog you. A very good price, if you're interested.
Can I ask you to give a response to Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, who has given his comment on the spending review, saying that he's concerned that it's going to result in insufficient funding for the Met and fewer police officers?
So the Met Police have had a challenging couple of years because essentially they were selling off assets they owned in order to pay for frontline policing. And obviously once you've sold the asset, you can't keep selling it. So they do have a structural challenge in the Met in particular. But as I say, funding for policing is growing at around 2%. It's now for the Home Secretary and police forces to work together about how best to manage those
So he's got to make his
transitions.
case to the Home Secretary?
Yeah, the budget's been settled with the Home Secretary. There's a growing amount of spending into frontline policing. We want to support them to be able to do that. But there is a particular challenge there that, of course, my colleagues will need to work through.
He also says it's disappointing that there's no commitment today from the Treasury to invest in a new infrastructure that London needs. That's a deliberate choice, is it, on your part, to move things, the spending, the investment out of London and South East?
This is always the problem because everyone would like their thing. We can't do everything. I mean, look, there's significant investment coming into London in terms of transport for London, pretty significant chunks of money going into TfL, our commitment to Heathrow and all of the consequences around that, our commitment to affordable housing and social housing, which will include a significant build in London. But of course, are there projects that the Mayor would have liked to have had that's not been funded sure, but there are in other parts of the country. What we're trying to do, we've increased capital investment. We've put capital investment into London, but as you heard the Chancellor say last week, we're also tilting capital investment to the North and the Midlands, which historically have been underinvested in, and that just means that it doesn't go around as much as some people might like to have it.
And can I also ask you about, there was news today on jobs, the fact that there are now tens of thousands fewer people in employment. Now, a lot of sectors, including the hospitality sector, the tourism sector, they are blaming the rise in employers' national insurance. Are you worried about the jobs market?
Well, there's, as always, there's some kind of up arrows and some down arrows on the jobs market. You know, we've actually had, I think it's 500,000 jobs created since we came into office. We know from lots of our announcements today that it will create a lot of demand for jobs in certain sectors around the country, support for public servants as well. But of course, we do have a problem with people not in education, training or skills, particularly at the lower end. We've got a problem in terms of inactivity, where people have been too sick to be able to work for a long time. The last government used to just discount people who were sick and not in work and then say employment was going up, but just completely ignored the fact that so many people were coming out of the labour market altogether. You know, our investment into skills and training, our reforms of the welfare system, our funding for further education colleges, all of these are trying to help get those people back into work so that we can get those numbers up. But we've certainly got a job to do.
One final question, very short answer. Who was the most difficult cabinet minister to deal with?
I'm not answering that question.
Right, we need to let you go. Darren Jones there, Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Thank you very much indeed. And before you go, Paul, just a final word from you on your overview of this.
Well, overall, we got what we expected, which is a fair bit of money for health. Despite what you heard, what sounded like a lot of giveaways, actually really tight for quite a lot of other areas. And as I said earlier, I think three things are going to, my guess is that 3 or 4 things are going to come back and be difficult for Darren and his colleagues. One is defence spending is sticking at 2.6% of national income in 2027. So there's another 2 years to go when there's going to be no further progress towards the 3% the government says it's committed to, and that, they're going to come under pressure on that, I think. Secondly, I know that we've got a reduction in the number of school pupils over this period, but this looks like a very tight settlement for schools, particularly given that some of the money is going on free school meals, and we know that there's real pressure on special educational needs. So I think that's going to be difficult. There's going to be a lot more pressure on public sector pay over this period, and there's not a lot of money going in there for public sector pay. So I think those are the sorts of things where we're going to see continued pressures, but this is, you know, this is a settlement within, as you'd expect, within the tight budgets, and you know, the use has been made of savings from the asylum, from overseas aid and so on, to, you know, to smooth out some of those reductions.
OK, we had to let you go too for the last time, Paul Johnson. You're standing down from your role at the IFS, but thank you for helping us over so many years understand all of these figures, all very important figures. Thank you to both of you. Let's now go to Jim Connolly, who is in Leeds, to get some more reaction.
Yeah, we're at the old fire station, close here, obviously, and this is a community centre now, and it helps a lot of people in an area where people genuinely suffer. There are 6 charities based out of here, so that gives you a scale of the problem that many people in the local area may be facing at the minute. There is obviously a very cheap joke that we're not going to make about where the axe has fallen today, but we're a serious programme, so we're going to have a serious chat with some people. Fran, you run this place. This area of Leeds, people struggle. What do you think was in today for those people?
I'm not sure there was very much, really. What we really need is for funding to be directed straight at the heart of communities. Things like community ownership of buildings and spaces, so that people at grassroots level can really use their own power and skills to help themselves. They know what to do and what needs doing. The funding needs to come right to us at the heart of communities.
Does it sometimes feel like it takes a long time to filter down? So a big announcement today could take maybe a couple of years to filter down here?
Completely, and the need is here and it's immediate, and I think also by the time it gets to us, lots of people have had a chomp at the pie, and the money is needed here for these people with this real lived experience of poverty and cost of living crisis and all the things that go hand in hand with that.
Well, Fran, thanks ever so much for having us down here. We've got a panel of people who are joining us. They were with us earlier, some of the people, and we're going to get some reaction now. We've heard from the Chancellor to what has been said. Tasha, you're new to us, so introduce yourself to us.
So my name is Tasha Brown, and I run the Black Health Initiative charity, where we fight for better health outcomes for marginalised communities here in Leeds and West Yorkshire.
So we've had announcements around increased investment in the NHS. I'm sure you think, is that a good thing?
We don't know how to feel about it, to be honest. We're very anxious. We want to know how that's going to impact the work that we do here at Black Health Initiative. So I suppose it's just fingers crossed that we have a really good outcome for us in the third sector.
You said to me before that you feel like you're sometimes just picking up the pieces at the end of the sort of line with the NHS. Is that your role?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the third sector, we definitely support the people that fall through the gaps. We help and support the NHS in areas where they can and they fall short. So we get referrals constantly on a weekly basis from different departments in the NHS, and we're having to go out and do clinical trials and you know, health checks on people and do supportive work and outreach work for many of the people in the community. So yeah, the third sector really needs these resources, and we hope it's a good outcome for us.
Henry, introduce yourself again to us.
So I'm Henry, and I'm from the Northern Powerhouse Partnership.
Big picture then, what does this mean for the north of England? What does today's announcement mean?
There's some really big news in the Chancellor's speech, and she indicated that in the next few weeks, very imminently, there'll be an announcement on something called Northern Powerhouse Rail, and that's what would connect cities like here in Leeds, not only to Hull towards the east, but going west towards first Bradford and then Manchester and Liverpool. And that's so important because we know that this city is constrained by the number of people who can get here every day, and that's to do with local transport. But it's also that if we were in London, people in Brighton, people in Cambridge would think nothing of going into work in London every day. The reality is people in Manchester, unless they're prepared to drive across the M62 and sort of take the lottery of how long that will take them, cannot reliably get from where they live to a job here every day. There just aren't enough seats on the trains. So we need to invest in that connectivity if we want to grow the size of the labour market so that businesses like the one that Tom runs can access talent not just locally but from across the north of England. At the moment that just isn't possible.
We were all sat around watching the Chancellor and you gave an audible whoop at one point. You cheered. What was that cheer for?
Well, I've known Rachel Reeves a very long time as a Leeds MP and as Shadow Chancellor, and she was always hugely supportive of us at the Northern Powers Partnership, and our chair, outgoing chair, Jim O'Neill, who's been advising her quite a lot of the time as well in opposition, really working with us on these issues to think about how you could raise northern productivity. And so I'm just really glad that she hasn't forgotten that the north of England is critical for the government's growth mission. Yes, we do need growth in that Oxford-Cambridge corridor, but in the end, if you look at cities like Hull and Middlesbrough, they're both bigger than Oxford or Cambridge. So if you want to do something about national productivity, you can't just look at those smaller, currently successful places. You've got to work out how can you make those places that currently are not as productive as they could be to be as productive as they would be in any other European country. Because the problem in this country isn't that we don't have any success, it's just that here in the north of England, we don't do as well economically as our European equivalents. And if we could make our cities here as successful as their equivalents in Europe, we'd be in a much stronger position and contribute a lot more tax revenue to pay for public services like the ones for people who need them in our marginalised communities.
Tom, what does your tech company do here, and did you hear anything in it today that you thought, yes? Did you audibly whoop at any point?
I don't think I audibly whooped. Maybe I'm not an audible whooper.
Silent whooper.
I'm the founder and the CTO of the Data City. We're a 30-person tech company in Leeds. And one of the things that I think was a positive surprise to us was we read the UK government's AI action plan when it came out a few months ago. We quite enjoyed it. There were a few things that we didn't really like about it. It talked a lot about Oxford and London and nothing about Leeds and Manchester, which we were surprised by. We didn't know if there was any money behind it, so I think today it was a surprise to everyone to hear that there'd be £2 billion going behind the AI action plan. That's good for us as an AI company in Leeds. We'll find out the details of that in a few weeks' time, and I suppose that's like a common theme of the responses to the spending review is we'll find out the details in a week or two's time. We hope they're good. They seem to be not bad. So not bad is pretty good by my book.
You're, in the nicest possible way, a bit of a transport nerd, aren't you?
Yeah.
Right? What was in it today for places like Leeds?
So in the details, not a lot. There was positive sounds about Northern Powerhouse Rail. We've had previous announcements which commit to higher investment in infrastructure. We really hope that happens. I think the details again will come out in the next week or two. So nothing bad. I mean, if you think back over the last decades, what you typically get in these type of announcements is an announcement that investment in Leeds has been cancelled, and that didn't happen today. So we're happy about that.
Right. Well, Vicky, some sort of cautious optimism, maybe sort of couched in very sort of northern English terms of a bit sort of, I don't know, a bit this. I'm not really sure what to make of it all, but that is what people will be looking at going forward.
Oh, thank you very much, Jim. Or maybe it's the first time we've had a whoop of delight. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's ever happened before. Henry, thanks very much, Jim. What's your overview thought of where we are now? Because I think for people watching, you know, things are tight. There wasn't much money around. And yet, of course, you've got these big announcements about things that might be happening, things that might be being built in the Northwest and other places.
Yeah, and a lot of the charts in this document that we're going through, talking about day-to-day spending and its trajectory for the next few years, are pretty tight, tell quite a difficult story for people around the country, for different public services, for the government. That wasn't really the vibe of Rachel Reeves' speech at all, and that's because she was emphasising investment spending, capital spending. But I do think politically there was clearly a conscious choice by the government today to try to use today as a bit of a turning point on a difficult first year. It is almost a year that they've been in office now. Of course, we got the full details on the winter fuel U-turn earlier this week, and then at Cabinet just before today's events, Keir Starmer told his ministers, we're told, that this was the end of the first phase of this government, talked about marking a new chapter. I just wonder, though, if the government might risk moving a bit early to that language, because when you look in the small print of day-to-day spending, the government risks describing a picture of optimism which just might feel a bit at odds with voters' experience of Britain for a little while yet.
Yeah, and they were criticised a lot when they came in for being too gloomy, weren't they? That they were depressing everybody because they kept going on about how difficult things were. Maybe they're just trying to put that right. But I guess the problem is it does take a long time for these capital projects to start, you know, making a difference to people's lives.
And I think the obvious point is, well, they have been in office for a year. If they're now going to come back and say, well, it's a very, very long time to build a train line, or to build a hospital, like, did they really not know that these were their priorities a year ago coming into office? Did they have to go through this whole process of, like, all this foundation? You know, they know they have made some interesting choices. They have turned the infrastructure tap towards Midlands and the North, away from the South East. That's a potentially historic shift. They have decided to spend more on capital and move it away from departments. So there's some interesting strategic choices. Just worth noting, just with my economics hat on, just in terms of the background of the economy, you know, one of the sources of big instability has obviously been the trade war. It is worth noting that President Trump has just announced a deal has been done with China on trade, which is obviously good news in terms of that instability.
And knock-on effects for
and the knock-on effects for all of us. I think in their best reading of this, they would think we've signed these trade deals. We did get those Q1 growth figures. There are other figures that aren't going their way. They're now setting out a plan that they hope everyone can buy into. That's I think, where we are. Can they deliver on it? That's the question.
Okay, let's turn now to Gareth Davies, who is Shadow Treasury Minister. Thanks for coming in to speak to us. We heard there from Jim in Leeds, whoops of delight that things were finally going to be getting built. I mean, your previous government promised a lot about levelling up and making sure that there was regeneration in lots of these parts of the country, and you never delivered on it.
Well, we did have something called the global pandemic and a war in Ukraine, which did dominate the last parliament. Absolutely right. There was funding, significant funding actually, that was deployed around the country. We had 13 investment zones that were highly successful at generating new investment. We were second in the world for R&D investment. I could go on, but I thought they inherited a terrible situation, Labour. And yet today, as you've been describing, they were very upbeat about capital investment increasing. And so I'm a little confused as to what the narrative from Labour is. If the inheritance was so bad and they were trying to fill all these black holes, how on earth can they increase spending to such levels? Be in no doubt this is born out of higher borrowing, higher debt, and there will be higher taxes to pay as a result of this. but also the fact that...
So you're against, just to be clear, you're against the extra borrowing and those capital spending announcements that they've made?
I didn't say that, but we are continuing to see...
That's implication, though, isn't it? If
not,
you say...
not at all. Let me explain. So they have spent billions of pounds on things they did not need to spend, not least the £30 billion surrender to Mauritius of the Chagos Islands, the £9 billion of pay increases, inflation-busting pay increases with no reform, no productivity gains in return. £8 billion for GB Energy, which is an energy company that apparently doesn't produce any energy at all. There are a series of announcements that this Chancellor has made, and I haven't even started to begin with the U-turns that this Chancellor is starting to make on winter fuel payments. So that's an extra £1 billion that she's going to have to find in the autumn through tax rises. If they cave to Labour MPs on two-child benefit cap, that's £3.5 billion extra a year. So be in no doubt, tax rises, further tax rises are coming, and this government has already increased them to record levels.
But just to clarify, you are in favour of the project she was announcing, but what, you would fund them differently? You wouldn't borrow to fund them, or are you against those
anybody
projects?
that watched that short statement and took away any great detail? We will comb through the detail. She's already
She's going to spend an extra
leaked.
£100 billion on capital projects.
That's the overall, and if you look at our record, we increase capital spending quite significantly too, and that's a good thing. We want that, but it's on the back of an economy that is suffering because of a lack of confidence owing to this government's increased taxes on business and talking down the country for 6 months into office. Sluggish growth that has been downgraded by every international body.
Well, they point to the fact that there was higher growth in the first quarter.
There was, but they inherited the fastest growth in the G7 when we left office, which was higher growth in that quarter. It is just a quarter, but I should mention the first quarter that they were in office, it was 0% growth. The second quarter they were in office, it was 0.1% growth. It's not exactly a great record on growth in the first year for a government that said its number one mission was growth. But you are right. I think where you're going is that we do need to increase growth in our economy. And if we can increase growth to substantial levels, and you can do that by investing in infrastructure through capital spending, then you don't have to borrow as much. But we have, we have a significant amount of debt and borrowing at very high costs because the Bank of England have kept interest rates. They have cut them a few times, but they were projected to cut them even more, and they haven't. They've kept them higher, which means that we, the British taxpayer, are paying more in debt interest today than we are on an entire defence budget. I don't think that's right.
Yeah, but the taxpayer would also say that the tax burden was at a record high under your government, and the present government would argue that a lot of this is about clearing up the mess that you left, that public services were not in a good state, and lots of people watching this will have noticed that.
So taxes did have to rise because we spent £400 billion, and we can debate whether we were too generous and we provided too much support through COVID, but that was £400 billion plus another £100 billion on the back of wholesale gas prices spiking because of the war in Ukraine, and we effectively paid 50% of energy bills during that period, a very difficult cost of living period. And we believe as Conservatives in paying down our debt so that you're not overpaying interest, so that you can spend it on other things like education, etc. So we did increase taxes, but we did get the economy into such a position where it was growing faster, and that enabled us in the last few months, in the last year of our time in office, to cut national insurance twice. And I'm pretty sure your viewers will remember that and notice that in their pay
but a lot of people say that wasn't funded, was it?
It was funded.
The 4p cut in national insurance for employees. Do you regret doing that?
We were delighted to be able to get the economy into a position where it's 2% inflation, it's 3.5% today.
Could the country afford that at the time?
Deficit in half, where we could cut taxes for people in work. If you cut taxes on people in work, that generates a stimulant to the economy. It says to the country, we value work, we want you to work. By the way, this was alongside a plan to reduce welfare by £12 billion. Labour have reduced it by £3 billion. We want them to go further. But you've got to stimulate growth by empowering businesses and by empowering workers. We sought to do that by cutting taxes on businesses and cutting taxes on employees when we were in a position to do so. This government are doing the opposite.
Can I just, isn't there a danger with being, and I understand why you do it, you're sort of engaged in a sort of basket case Britain narrative. The growth rate is what it was in Q1. It's been up and down. It's probably not caused by this government, and it's, you know, as is the fruits of it. You know, it doesn't really matter. But I'm really intrigued to know, like, on Monday, the Prime Minister had sat next to him, probably the most important businessman in the world right now, the Chief Executive of Nvidia, Jensen Huang, who said Britain was the envy of the world. Now, probably you guys can take some credit for some of that. And this government, doesn't that show, when you've got someone like that who controls the flow of the most important microchips in the world, a guy like that, doesn't that show, in fact, that you need to give some credit, maybe you should share some credit, for where things might go in the future? Because this is all about the future. The growth rates now are not impacted by any of these policies.
This is what's the most heartbreaking situation about this government. We do have, in this country, an amazing investable opportunity for businesses around the world. John Gray of Blackstone, Jamie Dimon, he said the same when we were in office.
If we were a basket case, they wouldn't be saying that.
I think they still want to come here because, although a lot of people are leaving, by the way, because of the fundamentals of our country. And we have great universities, we have a common language, common law, great regulators. Yeah.
Do you feel a bit bad when you're talking stuff down so much? I mean, there is an opportunity.
I'm talking
in
this
Britain.
Government down. I would never talk this country down.
But the trade deals. Listen.
But how much is that going to affect? Take one.
Not a huge amount in terms of GDP.
All. I mean,
but let's be clear.
Anything.
Under the Conservatives, it was said that you couldn't do a deal with Europe like this and still do a deal with the Gulf and still do a deal with the rest of the world. They said it was impossible. They've literally disproved. You know, maybe they're not the best believers in Brexit. You guys were, and you didn't manage to sort of sew the thread through the eye of that needle.
Well, we signed trade agreements all over the world, not least entering CPTPP, which is 13% of the global GDP, some of the fastest economies of the world. So it's not true to say that we didn't sign trade agreements. We signed lots of them, and Kemi Badenoch, by the way, was the one to do it.
I have one more question for you. Yesterday, I had Kevin Hollenrake sitting in that seat, who apologised, said sorry for Liz Truss's mini-budget. Would you like to say sorry?
I mean, this is a great thing. I know the BBC are really pushing this at the moment to it does, I'm afraid, distract away from the issues.
No, I didn't push him. He was very happy to apologise.
Yeah, no, I'm not happy to apologise. I'll apologise for that when Rachel Reeves apologises for the millions of people that had their winter fuel payments withdrawn. I think every government has issues. We certainly had an issue with Liz Truss, but that was many years ago. We have moved on. We lost an election on the back of it. Right now, Labour are pushing pensioners into poverty. They are taxing businesses so that they can't hire anybody. The growth has been downgraded. Inflation is up. Unemployment is up. And unfortunately, unfortunately, that is what people are really worried about right now.
OK, Gareth Davis, thank you very much for joining us. And Henry, if I could just come to you, more about the mood of Labour MPs, actually, because listening to that, you know, it did sound positive, didn't it? It sounded positive about the economy. There's been the reversal on the winter fuel allowance. It was interesting that Richard Bergen, from the left of the party during Prime Minister's questions, got up and said, could you now look at the two-child benefit cap? Is that going to be an issue now, do you think, for the Chancellor?
Yes, although it does seem on the two-child benefit cap fairly inevitable that come the autumn the government is going to abolish it. I mean, they've definitely allowed the idea to fester that they are going to do so. I think what's going to be a more immediate issue for this government and its handling of its own backbenchers, indeed actually some frontbenchers, is welfare. We are expecting finally a vote on the welfare cuts that were announced by the government back in the spring. It probably is still the spring, isn't it? Anyway, a little earlier in the spring. We're finally expecting that vote to come in the next few weeks. There are a lot of
There has to be a Commons vote on that.
There has to be a vote.
Yeah.
That was actually, I think, part of the dynamic between the government and the Office for Budget Responsibility when they were trying to persuade the Office for Budget Responsibility they really could trust them that they were going to save billions of pounds from the welfare budget. That vote is still looking pretty dicey for the government. And I think the interesting...
It's incredible. They've got a massive majority, haven't they?
Well, OK, there's different versions of diciness. Is the government actually going to lose that vote? Almost certainly not. The majority is enormous. But there are sizes of rebellion which no government, however big its majority, will be willing to wear because it just looks terrible. And I think what's really interesting about the winter fuel reversal that we saw finally complete on Monday is that you are not seeing, at least in among the MPs I've spoken to so far, you're not seeing Labour MPs say, well, fair play to Rachel Reeves. She noticed our problem with that, and we've got a lot of goodwill towards her now, so we're going to back away from our campaign on welfare reform. They're saying, well, with a bit of pressure, she'll fold. Yeah. And that, I think, is now the dynamic playing out within the Labour Party. And it's quite a dangerous dynamic for, I mean, a lot of governments get to a position like that eventually. They haven't been in office for even a full year yet. So I think it is one to really watch for over the next few weeks, as well received as today will have been, I think, in the chamber.
The PM sounded quite robust on that in PMQs, didn't he?
Yeah.
He didn't sound like from the Richard Burnham
he
question.
has to. He has to, because it's a massive chunk of the budget. That's the distinction with winter fuel. Yeah. I mean, one of the criticisms that Labour MPs made of winter fuel originally was all that political capital for, what, £1.5 billion? Yeah. And obviously it's dramatically less now, and all the political capital's been expended. Welfare reform, this government really does need to save the amount of money it says it's going to save in order to make these books balanced.
It's a huge amount of money, isn't it?
It's a huge amount of money. And also, I think Keir Starmer has made clear that he really does also believe in it as a moral question for the party of work, the Labour Party, that he believes there are too many people out of work who ought not to be. The problem is, a lot of his own MPs aren't quite in the same place.
There's another challenge here, which is I think that there are a number of long-term issues that will crystallise in this Parliament. Well, I haven't read the whole document yet, but I don't think they're mentioned. A couple of big ones. So, for example, they're going to lose if the plans on electric vehicles. Nerdy subject, but this really matters. If the electric vehicles happen, you lose the vehicle excise duty, $30 billion a year. Where are they going to get that tax money from? You would sort of expect in this document, like a little paragraph saying, maybe we'll get a, Pathfinder project to try and work out if it's going to work. At this stage, if you've got any chance of introducing this sort of stuff in the 2030s, they wouldn't go near it. They wouldn't feel like they're politically strong enough, maybe.
Well, that's one of the interesting things after winter fuel, isn't it? Is that this government dared to touch a third rail that so many previous governments would have, with their massive majority, they thought maybe we can actually grapple with a question that other governments have looked at. I don't think they'll necessarily be eager to rush into grappling with others soon, like road pricing.
Let's have a little reminder of what Rachel Reeves announced in that spending review. Big focus on the NHS. Day-to-day spending will be up 3% a year. 13,000 additional police staff. 2.6% of GDP will go on defence by 2027. £4.5 billion more a year being put aside for the core schools budget. £39 billion for affordable and social housing. She also announced £52 billion for Scotland, £20 billion for Northern Ireland, £23 billion for Wales, £280 million for the new Border Security Command, and £1.2 billion a year for training and apprenticeships. Well, I'm delighted to say I'm joined now by the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey. First of all, your reaction to what you heard. Presumably capital expenditure, lots of projects there, which presumably you back?
Well, look at the details. I mean, overall, I think the Chancellor was right to make the point to start off with that the Conservatives had left the public finances in a mess, left a black hole. Our real worry, as we heard her, is she's going to leave a black hole in social care funding. And that's critical for their strategy. They're saying they're going to put right the NHS. They put a lot of money into that, and we absolutely welcome that. That's what we had been arguing for. But we'd also said that you could end up wasting a lot of that money if you don't ensure that family carers and social care is also invested in. And they have no answer on that at the moment.
So you didn't hear anything there on social care that you...
Almost nothing. They talked about the fair pay agreement. We've heard that before. And then they resorted to the Louise Casey Commission, which isn't going to report for 3 years, and they've said won't be implemented till middle of the next decade. So it's real worry that they still haven't grasped this essential thing and you can't fix the NHS unless you fix care. So we're going to be holding them to account on that. In terms of other areas, I mean, clearly defence spending increases are welcome, some of the capital that you mentioned. But
Would you like to see that go to 3%? Defence spending?
We've said that there should be a cross-party consensus and an agreement, a meeting, a discussion to try to get it to 3% quicker than they currently plan.
And to work out how you pay for that.
Exactly. That's why I think that's going to have to be cross-party. When we started looking at the details, and it is very early days, we're really worried about local government. I think that could be really hit in this settlement. And given local councils are on the brink of bankruptcy all around the country, I think that is really worrying. I think the police settlement looks like it's going to be tough to tackle the crime that we all know is out there, and certainly to deliver on what Labour promised. And then I'm worried about rural communities. DEFRA's budgets have got a hit as well. So we'll study the detail, but the big picture is they won't be able to deliver on NHS without social care.
They would argue, weren't they, that they have to make difficult choices, as you agree with them, that you think the Conservatives left the public finances in a bad way. You have sat on the front benches in coalition where you've seen difficult choices having to be made, including huge cuts to local government. And many would argue that actually that's part of the problem that we're seeing now feeding through.
Well, there are always difficult choices. I wouldn't want to shy from that. But let's give you one difficult choice that I think they've just got wrong, the increase in national insurance for employers, which is hitting lots of small businesses, I think dragging back growth, hitting lots of health providers who aren't protected by it. We had argued to raise the money that we do need for the NHS in different ways. So we talked about taking bank taxes back to what they were in 2016. That would raise $4.4 billion a year. We talked about quadrupling the digital services tax. I know Donald Trump won't like it, but who cares? I think social media giants should be paying more. We talked, for example, that there should be a gambling tax. I mean, the gambling industry, online gambling industry, is making huge profits. We reckon there's a nearly £1 billion you can get from there. So we've put forward, unlike any other party, an alternative costed agenda for delivering health and care spending without some of the, I think, growth-hitting policies that they've adopted, like the jobs tax.
But the IFS does say that actually there are consequences to those taxes that you are suggesting, that actually in the end, that raising of taxes does get fed through to the consumer. You make it sound like as if it won't be, because they're just big media giants. But
there may be the impact on banks and on social media giants, and of course there would be. But compared to the impact on our economy, on millions of little businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, the impact on their employees as well, because all the evidence shows it passed through to less employment and lower wages. I think it's such a bad tax policy, and I think ours is a much better approach, a much fairer approach, and it would ensure that social care investment was there.
How confident you would raise the money that you need to?
We're really confident. And let me give you another thing we do to raise the money, and that is really push up growth. So we have argued, as you know, that the UK should have a new customs union with the EU. Frontier Economics reckon that in the longer term that would raise public finances by £25 billion because it would have such a positive impact on growth. And that fundamentally is where the Chancellor's getting it wrong, just like the Conservatives did.
That involves going back into the customs union?
Well, creating a new one, actually. You have to.
Okay.
You wouldn't be the same one because we wouldn't be part of the European Union in it. But the European Union has customs union agreements with other countries that are outside the EU. That's what we're arguing for. And actually, our proposal through that would mean a closer trading relationship with the EU than even the Frontier Economics analysis shows. And they were suggesting a really positive impact on growth is hotly surprising. So, the damage that we saw with Boris Johnson's dreadful Brexit deal, that has to be reversed. I'm afraid Labour has been way too timid on that, and that is constraining their ability.
They are moving closer, aren't they, to arrangement?
You'd lose the India deal, you'd lose the Gulf deal, you'd lose the America deal. Are you sure about that? I understand why you might have said that, but they've now managed to sign these other deals that are helping in the current circumstance.
Well, you talk about the trade freedom, allegedly, that we've had after
Not allegedly.
Brexit.
You wouldn't have got the deal with Trump.
It's only worth having if you actually get really good benefits from it. Right. All the trade deals that the Tories signed were either rollover deals or the Australia and New Zealand deal, which we think were not really good for our country. Then you mentioned the three you've talked about. The India one is not bad, but it's actually relatively modest. And in the EU, you could have got a better deal. I know, because when I was trade minister...
They haven't got a deal with
Hold on. When I was a trade minister, I was negotiating with the EU for a trade deal with India. The people who prevented it happening were the Conservatives. Yeah. And if we'd had that trade deal in the EU, we'd be having far bigger benefits with our trade with India than is on the table with Keir Starmer's trade agreement. So I'm afraid if you get into the customs union again, not only do you get a huge benefit from increasing our trade with our nearest partners, and that's, by the way, way bigger benefit than you get from the trade deals you've mentioned, but you could also negotiate better deals with India. And you may want to mention the US trade deal. I think that's a dreadful trade deal, really.
Good for the steel industry.
Well, we're no
car industry potentially.
Hold on, we're no better. In fact, we're worse off than we were this January. So, lauding that trade deal is giving in to Donald Trump.
Other countries are worse off than we are.
But if we were in the EU, I think we could negotiate. This is really important. If we were in the EU customs union, within that customs union, we could support the EU in negotiations. I think we could get a better deal as a result of that because we have more firepower.
There are various areas where you support government spending or would like them to spend more. One of the big ways the government plans to raise money is welfare cuts. There's going to be a vote on that in the House of Commons probably later this month. You've got quite a lot of MPs now. What are you going to tell them to do in that vote?
Well, first of all, we're going to look at the details of that vote. That's really, really important because there's no doubt we need to get more people into work. We're absolutely up for that. And there are some things that the government have put forward that we would support. So there's the Try First proposal, where you go into work and you don't lose your benefits, and if that work works out, then you do come off benefits. Those are the sorts of reforms that actually make perfect sense, and we've argued, because we do want to get more people off benefits into work.
But the cuts to personal independence
However, when you look at some of the PIP proposals, they will actually leave some people really badly off. Let me take one example that I've talked a lot about and asked the Prime Minister about, and that's carers. I've got an example of someone whose loved one they're looking after, they're not able to work, they'd never be able to go back into the labour market, they're going to lose their PIP, and because carers allowance, which this person claims because they're need to be full-time care for the loved one, they lose that as well. The total loss under this government's proposals to that family will be £12,000. We will oppose that.
What about the broader bringing down of the welfare bill, though? Do you think, because a lot of people are saying it's not sustainable in the way that it's due to go up, are there any cuts that you do think should be made?
Well, the question is, how do you reduce the welfare bill? It's absolutely essential we get people back to work. But, you know, take the carers allowance again. If you reform that properly, you would get rid of the disincentive to work that's in there. So I know loads of carers. I would argue there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of carers who would like to work more, but the carers allowance system penalises them, and therefore they don't do as much work as they could do. Now, that's crazy. Let's get rid of the disincentives in the system that prevent people balancing work and care. That would be quite a big one. I also agree with the proposal from the government that you can try the work first before you lose your benefits, and that then encourages more people back to work. There's 101 things you could do to reduce the welfare budget. The
PIP proposal raises a large chunk of the money that the government plans to then use on spending in areas that you want them to spend
money. There's not one PIP proposal. The PIP proposal has several elements to it. Some are utterly unacceptable, as I've made clear. We will look and debate the others. But Charlie Mayfield, who used to be the CEO of John Lewis, he's doing a major review into how we get people back to work. He's coming up with some exciting proposals. It's commissioned by the government, by the way, but I think that is where to go. There's real opportunities to cut the welfare bill and get people back into work, which will really boost the economy and, by the way, therefore generate more tax revenues. So there is a debate on here, but we've got to get it right.
Thank you, Sir Davey. Thank you for joining us here in the studio today with your reaction to the spending review. And Henry, talking about that welfare budget, I mean, that wasn't part of today's announcement, but as you say, it does loom large, doesn't it, over what's going to happen in the next few months?
Yeah, very much so, because I think part of the political backdrop for today is that Rachel Reeves, for years, has had an unassailable position within the Labour Party, including with her colleagues, in terms of her ability to set the Labour Party's economic strategy and the way it approaches a sort of political economy. She's now the Chancellor, and that position is, shall we say, not unassailable. I mean, I'm really struck by the breadth, the ideological breadth of Labour people who will privately question her approach to the economy or indeed her long-term future as Chancellor. Now, that might be a bit overwrought on their part, but what I'm saying is that in the next few weeks you are going to see another really big test of another really big call, a big choice, as she'd probably put it, that she made. And it is going to be very interesting, the verdict that is returned, especially by her own MPs.
And you have to think of the origin story of that welfare cut. It came because of an in-year change in the forecast, which was largely driven by a global change in the Treasury yields, and so they had to come back and find more cuts to welfare. Now, we don't quite know what direction it's going to go in by the time of the budget, but actually the IMF, for example, suggested, maybe you should only do this once a year. You can't be just coming back every 6 months every time, Donald Trump makes an announcement on tariffs.
They don't do it like that, do they?
Yeah. The Treasury sort of pushed back against it, but it's because actually, here's the problem. If it goes in the other direction and you want to cash in the goodies at some point in the future,
to be able to do that.
You want to be able to have that freedom.
Point.
That's why they might not do it. But this cut that we're talking about was the direct result of the way in which her fiscal rules actually manifested themselves in policy terms. And so it's interesting, that's really interesting. And if you stack this up now, if you have, I think the billion on a winter fuel allowance, it's manageable. You say you could deal with that in the budget. You add in this, if his intelligence is right, I'm not going to doubt it, if it's the full thing, that's $3.5 billion. I mean, there are other sort of middle way changes you could do, 3-child. And then on top of that, there are other reforms where they may get the taste for the forcing the U-turn. These things tend to be quite viral, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's an authority question.
Let's get some more political reaction now. I am joined from College Green by Stephen Flynn, who is the Westminster leader of the SNP, and by Adrian Ramsey, the Green Party co-leader. Hello to both of you. Stephen, if I could come to you first. What's your reaction to what the Chancellor had to say? There was quite a lot of mention of Scotland and some of the things that will be some of the investment that is coming your way. You must be pleased.
Yeah, I mean, she's trying to steal my thunder by being so talkative about Scotland, my favourite topic, of course. Look, I think if you're a family right now who are struggling under the cost of living crisis with massive energy bills, or you're a disabled person who knows that their personal independence payments are about to be cut, or you're a business who's watching this knowing that you can't employ staff because of the national insurance increase that has crippled your ability to grow as well, you'll be listening to the Chancellor telling you that everything is fantastic and thinking she's living in an absolutely different world to you. And they'd probably be right to think that, because whilst Rachel Reeves has made a big play of capital investment here when it comes to day-to-day spending across many of her government departments that she's responsible for, there's going to be cuts. There's either going to be cuts or there's going to have to be tax rises later in the year, and that remains to be seen.
So you would like to see her spending more, and if so, how would you fund that?
Well, of course, if you're looking at the NHS, for instance, if I've picked the Chancellor up correctly, I think she said there's a 3% year-on-year increase. In comparison to what's came in the past under previous Labour governments, that's significantly smaller. Now, I'm quite open about the fact that I think the government should be looking at the likes of income tax, but what it should be doing is looking for growth, and it gets growth through migration, gets growth through more people of working age in the economy, and it gets growth by closer alignment to the European Union. We've edged towards that final point, but we've not quite got there in the way that I would like to see. So growth's important, but this budget doesn't appear to outline how that is going to happen, how she is going to be able to meet the expectations of a public which wanted change, but up till now has been let down.
I mean, you have the ability, don't you, as the Scottish Government, to raise taxes. Would you go further and do that?
Well, of course, in Scotland we have a progressive taxation system at the moment which allows us, I think it's another £1.5 billion of revenue to spend on the NHS, something which is opposed by opposition parties in Holyrood. If that was replicated by Rachel Reeves, you'd be talking tens of billions of pounds. I think it's about £17 billion, actually, if I recall correctly, that she would have available to her to spend on the priorities of the public, which is ultimately right now about dealing with the cost of living crisis, making sure energy bills are coming down and making sure that businesses can do what they can to grow the economy. She's been a barrier to that up to now, and I'm afraid that from listening to that today, there isn't any change in that regard.
When it comes to the 2-child benefit cap, I think you have announced that you are going to scrap that in Scotland, but it hasn't yet been implemented. Is that the case? And if so, when might you implement it? When could people know that they're going to get that extra money?
Yeah, so contrary to Westminster, the First Minister was clear a number of months ago that we would have a different position from the UK government with regards to the winter fuel payment, but also in respect of the 2-child cap, just as we do with the bedroom tax, because of course people in Scotland don't pay that, whilst vulnerable people in England do, and the Scottish Government will be implementing that as quickly as possible. Obviously it's reliant upon data from the Department for Work and Pensions, but what a stark contrast between that positive agenda to lift children out of poverty, and a UK government which doesn't want to change its mind on the two-child benefit cap. Indeed, I think there was a vote just last year, which I helped to put through in Parliament, that saw Labour MPs kicked out the party for voting against the party line in relation to that. So if they want to combat child poverty, they should be doing that, but they should be following other policies the Scottish Government have put in place, like the Scottish Child Payment. And we put forward figures from the House Commons Library which would indicate that some 2 million children could be lifted out of poverty across the UK if the Labour Party were to replicate our endeavours that we've already put in place in Holyrood. That's the sort of stuff that the public expect from a Labour Party, but up till now they've been let down.
Stephen Finn from the SNP, thank you very much indeed for giving your reaction to the spending review. Let's move now to Adrian Ramsey from the Green Party. And NHS spending, extra NHS spending, is something that you've been very keen on. Are you happy with what Rachel Reeves has had to say today?
Well, I've been keen on highlighting that people around the country are facing their health services severely overstretched. People can't get access to a dentist when they need one. The hospital corridors are full of patients. And at the same time, our schools are seeing real terms budget cuts. Head teachers I speak to are saying they don't know what they're going to do to make the books balance. They may have to look at making teachers redundant. This is just an awful situation to be in, especially when you also see some of the most vulnerable people in society facing cuts to their disability benefits that they rely on for the basics every day. And what we heard from the Chancellor today doesn't answer those questions, because your own analysis from the BBC has made clear that under Rachel Reeves' figures, from 2026 we will see a sharp decline in funding of public services at a time when we need to be increasing that funding. And that's why the Green Party's been saying there are options for the Chancellor here. She could be asking the very richest in society, the multimillionaires, the billionaires, to pay a modest amount more in tax in a way that would raise tens of billions to invest in those crucial services so that we're not seeing our health, our schools severely overstretched, and some of the most vulnerable people in society really suffering.
I mean, there is some evidence, and the IFS are one of those that say that actually a wealth tax, although lots of people think it can raise revenue, it is actually pretty hard to implement. People do find their way around it. This is not something that you can actually rely on in terms of extra spending money.
Well, what's interesting is the growing demands for a wealth tax across different parties in Parliament, including lots of Labour backbench MPs supporting the Green Party's call for a wealth tax. Lots of academic experts who've looked at how it works in different countries and how it can raise you that crucial revenue that you need for investing in public services, supporting the most vulnerable. And I'm now working with a group called the Patriotic Millionaires, who say we've benefited from Britain, from the investment that we've had in our country's infrastructure, in our public services, and now we want to give back that bit more that enable us to have a fairer society, that enable us to have access to health services when everyone needs them, for our schools to be properly funded, for disabled people to not be left in the lurch. That's the sort of future for Britain that I want to see, that restores pride and hope.
OK, Adrian Ramsey from the Green Party, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's have a recap and a look now at some of the changes that have been announced by Rachel Reeves today in terms of the changes in day-to-day spending. And that's a comparison between 2025-26, so this financial year, and to 2028-29. So if we look at the science, innovation and technology area, that's 7.4%, which is an increase. Health and social care will go up 2.8% over that period. Justice, 1.8%. Defence, 0.7%. Energy, security and net zero, 0.5%. Then if you turn to the Foreign Office, there's a drop of 6.9%, a drop for transport of 5%, Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, a drop of 2.7%, and for the Home Office, a drop of 1.7%, and then Culture, Media and Support, also a drop of 1.2%. So, Faisal, if we look at those, that does demonstrate, doesn't it, how the fact that the NHS is getting more, that there is a squeeze there for other departments. Now, some of them look quite striking. So the Foreign Office, that looks huge. That's partly, is it, to do with the overseas aid budget?
That is the overseas aid budget coming down, because it's now the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. We put all of those numbers to Darren Jones, and he sort of, I think the key one was the Home Office coming down 1.7%. He said, and obviously we've just got to help, these numbers haven't been checked by the OBR, and so we have to sort of unpack them and unpick them a bit. And he said that was explained by the fact that they just won't be using the asylum hotels, and that's the cost saving. That's also a policy.
It is a lot of money, isn't it?
It's a policy they want to lean into. So they have a sort of explanation for each of the bits here. Let me just tell you what that number is very specifically. It's the current day-to-day spending over the next 3 years. You'll get different numbers if you include the capital, or indeed if you focus on the capital, which is not wholly a relevant thing to do right now, given that a lot of the spending review was focused on capital. So, for example, if you look at the Energy Department, they have massive increases in capital
and
spending.
that's investment for projects such as nuclear power.
GB energy and all that sort of stuff. So they're a big winner, although it wouldn't show up in that money. Yeah. And so then the other thing that is being done is that you add up phase 1 of the spending review, which is what's already been decided, with that, which is phase 2. So you've got a 5-year picture and the capital, and you add in the current, and then you get that big overall number of 2.3%, which is why the Chancellor wants to say, unlike when Ed Davey was in Cabinet, which is what she compared it with, this is definitely not austerity.
So she's saying, well, I'm putting spending up because she's adding together all sorts of different pots.
Yes, and that's not, I can see why she would say, well, I had decided for this year to put in a great amount of money in this year, so I'm going to continue looking at that. I'm also going to continue capital because that's fundamentally my strategy. So there are legitimately different ways of cutting this pie. But clearly there is a squeeze in other departments as a result of the priority on capital, the priority on health and the priority on defence. That is what we're seeing. That is the choice they have made.
OK, thank you. Let's speak now to Richard Tice, who is the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, who joins us today. Thanks for joining us. What is your reaction to what you heard from Rachel Reeves today? An awful lot of projects, an awful lot of infrastructure spending. Is that something that you welcome?
Well, what we've heard from the Chancellor is an absolute splurge of spending that I fear much of it will be wasted on pay settlements with no productivity requirements, tens of billions on daft projects like carbon capture that nobody thinks works. There's no proof that it makes any difference whatsoever. And I'm already seeing this all over the place. So when I challenged the Chancellor in the Chamber, I did actually give us some good news. In the 10 councils that Reform are already controlling and running, we're identifying savings of tens of millions of pounds already on running costs and on capital costs. And that's the smart thing to do, is to start saving wasteful spending, smarter spending, and then you can invest that in frontline services and get better bang for your bucks. But this Chancellor is allowing borrowing to soar, hundreds of billions more of government debt that everybody's got to pay the price for. The price of government borrowing is going up, inflation's up, unemployment is up, and we heard in the last couple of days 250,000 jobs have disappeared down a huge crater of a loss of confidence in this Labour government just since the blunder budget last October.
I mean, Rachel Reeves would argue that she is borrowing more, but she's borrowing it to invest and she will get a return on that money. Your spending proposals, if we just look at one tax cut proposal on its own, is going to cost between 50 and 70 billion pounds a year. So you would be borrowing for tax cuts.
The problem is you're relying on completely fake information from the useless IFS. That number's about.
So how much would it cost?
That number's about 40 billion, and you save that by, for example, stop paying voluntary interest in the Bank of England to enrich city institutions on the printed money, the quantitative easing. Stop doing quantitative tightening. I've written to the Governor of the Bank of England. That
there
can
are
save
some
10,
who
hang on,
think that won't work.
No, the other central banks are not doing this. It is negligent of our central bank to be doing this. If you scrap net stupid zero, you save tens of billions every single year.
But a lot of that is private sector. No, but that's an important point. You do talk about this a lot.
I do.
That saving, a lot of the spending on net zero is from private individuals and the private sector. That's not government money.
Literally, in the hospital, in my constituency, the Pilgrim Hospital, they're now spending £23 million ripping out a perfectly good heating system to replace it with a net stupid zero compliance system. That is a grotesque waste of money, and that is happening across the whole country. And if you look at the Climate Change Committee's projections for spending on net zero over the next decade, it sets out the graph, and there are tens of billions every year of public sector money. That should stop. It's a grotesque waste of taxpayers' cash.
But when you talk about the bank reserves as well, the National Institute for Economic and Social Research has said that what you're suggesting is very dangerous, it's likely to be counterproductive, and it would imperil financial stability.
So why are other central banks doing it across Europe? Why is the ECB doing it? Why is no other central bank doing quantitative tightening? And why do two former deputy governors of the Bank of England agree with me? Why do lots of other senior economists,
Have you had a
including the
response?
Financial Times...
You've written, haven't you, to the governor of the Bank of England?
I'm just responding to your point. Actually, many journalists, economists, commentators, former deputy governors of the Bank of England agree with me. Tice is right on the principle. You can negotiate about the quantum, but I'm negotiating on behalf of the taxpayer. I think the sum should be zero. Stop enriching city bankers, and then you can invest it on the front line in healthcare and the like, for example. And yes, so I've written to the Governor of the Bank of England. I'm looking forward to a response. It's only Wednesday. No doubt he'll be thinking about it. I'm looking forward to hearing from them.
Would you say that your party is now a big state party? You have said that you want to see, for example, and you've seen that you welcome the reversal of the winter fuel allowance cut. Do you think the state should be doing more or less?
We want a smart state. So we want to motivate work. We want to motivate risk-taking. Deregulate, so have smart regulations, not massive daft regulations, and that's how you get growth. You can't tax your way out of a crisis, as this Chancellor thinks you can do. No, you've got to grow your way out of a crisis. The tragedy at the moment is entrepreneurs, business owners, risk-takers, they're fleeing the country. They've had enough. It's not worth it in this country under this disastrous Labour regime.
Richard, hello. Faisal Islam here, BBC Economics Editor. You think you can get £35 billion out of the Bank of England through this method? That the bank, the director's given a speech today and sort of implicitly criticised your plan as raising volatility. I mean, doesn't this risk... There's this risk of sterling crisis. 35 billion is a hell of a lot of money.
I repeat the point. Other central banks around the world are not doing what this Bank of England is doing. And guess what? They're doing fine. They're not doing quantitative tightening. The number now, because interest rates have fallen, because they've stupidly done some quantitative tightening, imposing tens of billions of losses already on the taxpayer, the number now is about 25, 26 billion pounds. This is absurd. This is our cash that is enriching bankers and city institutions, and I'm really angry about it.
So to be clear, you would extract from an unwilling Bank of England, an independent Bank of England, £35 billion a year. That's your plan to fill in any gaps in your budget?
That's part of our plan. You scrap net zero, as we've touched on.
And you scrap the independence of the Bank of England as well,
No, hang on. No, that's not what I said at all, and it's very clear in my letter. Right? The independence of the Bank of England on setting interest rates, on ensuring market stability, that's one point. But making massive strategic decisions about taxpayers spending taxpayers' billions of pounds on voluntarily paying interest on printed money, or voluntarily, foolishly doing quantitative tightening. That is a strategic decision that should be debated and held to account by people in Parliament, elected officials, not unelected officials.
And Richard, just one final quick question and answer from you. There will be a vote on cuts to welfare coming up. How are your MPs going to vote?
We'll look at the details of that and make our decision at the time. I haven't got that in front of me, so I can't make a judgment here live on TV, I'm afraid. OK, Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, thank you very much for joining us. And just for a final word, your overall view of what you've heard today, a lot of it was expected. How do you think it's going to go down on the Labour backbenches?
I think pretty well. I think they'll be happy with what the Chancellor said in the House of Commons. I think as the reality of this document settles in, though, it might have a sort of rougher reception. The big debate about economics in the Labour Party at the moment, including among Labour MPs and including privately among some government ministers, is whether the Chancellor ought to increase taxes or change her borrowing rules in the autumn, and I don't think she's closed down that debate today at all. OK, thank you very much indeed to Faisal and to you, Henry. That's all for today, but I'll be back with even more tomorrow from Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and on the iPlayer. Thank you very much for watching.